Welcome to Cosmic Wand. Today's adventure. Harry's Gringotts blood test revealed he owned Hogwarts itself and Dumbledore was just a tenant. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The blood test. The marble floor of Gringotts had been laid to make men feel small, and it worked on everyone except the boy who walked across it at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning in July. Because he had stopped being impressed by architecture designed to intimidate him sometime around the night a graveyard tried to kill him and failed. Harry Potter crossed the great hall of the bank without slowing. He was 15 years old, 3 weeks free of the Triwizard Tournament, and he had come to Diagon Alley alone, which would have horrified the people responsible for him if any of the people responsible for him had bothered to ask where he was. He wore a plain dark coat over Muggle clothes. He carried no wand in his hand, only a folded letter in his pocket, and he kept his chin level and his pace even, because a goblin teller could smell hesitation the way a shark smelled blood, and he had not come here to blade. He stopped at the nearest free counter. The teller did not look up. "Harry Potter," Harry said, "I'd like a full accounting of my accounts, and I'd like to speak with the goblin who manages them." Now the teller looked up. The quill in its long fingers stopped scratching. Whatever the goblin had expected of the morning, a 15-year-old asking for a full accounting in a steady voice was not it. "You have an appointment," the goblin said. It was not a question, and it was not true. "No," Harry said. "I have a withdrawal of vault privileges that someone placed on my trust account 3 weeks ago without my consent, and a Triwizard purse of 1,000 galleons that hasn't been deposited where I told the ministry to deposit it, and a suspicion that those two facts are connected. I'd like to find out. I think you'd like to find out too. Goblins don't enjoy other people moving gold around inside their bank." The teller's eyes narrowed to bright black lines. That last sentence had been a wager, and the wager paid. The goblin set down its quill, climbed off its stool, and said a single word in gobbledygook to a runner waiting along the wall. The runner sprinted. "Account manager Sharpfang will see you," the teller said. "Follow." They did not take him to a public office. He took him down, through a brass door and along a corridor of black stone where the torches burned without smoke, to a room with a single table of dark wood and 2 chairs and a wall of ledgers that stretched up past the reach of the light. A goblin already sat at the table. He was old, his face seemed like a walnut, and his eyes when they found Harry were the eyes of an accountant who had spent 80 years watching wizards lie to him and had stopped being surprised by it. "Mr. Potter," said Sharpfang, "sit." Harry sat. "You have made an accusation upstairs," the goblin said. "That gold has moved in your accounts without your hand. Before I open a single ledger I will tell you that goblins do not move a client's gold for any wizard's convenience, not the ministers, not the headmasters, not the Wisengammots. If gold has moved, it moved on a key, and a key is a key. So." He laid a flat hand on the table. "Let us see whose key turns in your locks." He clapped once. A younger goblin brought a sheet of parchment the color of old bone and a knife with a blade so thin it seemed to vanish edge on. Sharpfang set both before Harry. "This is a lineage parchment," he said. 7 drops. It reads the blood, not the name. Names lie. Blood is a ledger that cannot be falsified, and we keep the only honest books in this country." His mouth bent in something that was not a smile. "Your hand, Mr. Potter." Harry took the knife. He had been cut by worse. He drew the edge across the pad of his thumb, and the line opened cold and then warm, and he held his hand over the parchment and let it fall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and on the 7th drop the parchment drank the blood the way dry ground drinks rain and went still. For a moment nothing happened. Then the parchment began to burn, not with fire. The blood spread under the surface in lines of pale gold, branching, climbing, a tree of names writing itself faster than any quill, generation falling into generation. Potter into older names that Harry had never heard. Sharpfang leaned in, and the old patience in his face sharpened to attention, because the tree was not stopping where a wizarding pedigree stopped. It kept reaching. It split at the root into 2 great limbs, then 4, and at the head of each of the 4 limbs a sigil burned itself into the parchment and held, glowing, refusing to fade. A lion crowned in gold, a serpent coiled in green, an eagle wings spread in blue, a badger set in black and amber. Sharpfang did not move. The young goblin who had brought the knife made a sound low in his throat and took a step back from the table without seeming to know he had done it. Harry looked at the 4 marks burning on the parchment, and then at the goblin and asked the question plainly, because he had learned that the fastest way through a closed door was to walk at it as if it were already open. "Those are the 4 founders of Hogwarts," he said. "Aren't they?" "They are their seals," Sharpfang said. His voice had gone very quiet, very precise. "Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff." He raised his eyes from the parchment to Harry's face, and there was something in them now that had not been there when Harry sat down. Not warmth. Goblins did not do warmth, but a calculation that had suddenly grown teeth. "I have managed accounts in this bank for 91 years, Mr. Potter. I have read the lineage of every old family in Britain. I have never seen all 4 seals on a single sheet. No one living has. We were taught that no one ever would." "Why Why not? Because the four lines were never meant to meet. The goblin set both hands flat on the table on either side of the parchment, as if to keep it from floating away. Gryffindor's line runs through the Potters. That is old knowledge. Your father knew it. It bought you nothing but a sword once. Ravenclaw's line failed into squibs centuries ago and vanished into the Muggle world, into, I would wager, your mother's people, the Avances, a cadet branch no herald ever bothered to trace because it had no magic to sell. Hufflepuff married into the Potters 11 generations back, a footnote, a dowry, a name on a contract in a vault no one has opened since. He paused. And Slytherin's line runs through the House of Gaunt and through the Peverils before them, and there is no marriage, no dowry, no honest path by which Salazar Slytherin's blood should burn on the same sheet as Godric Gryffindor's. And yet, he tapped the green serpent with one black nail. There it is, burning as bright as the rest, which means it is in you, Mr. Potter. Living blood, not borrowed. The parchment cannot be fooled. So I will ask you a question, and I advise you to answer it truthfully, because I will know if you do not. He leaned forward. When did Slytherin's blood enter your body? Harry's hand had gone to his forehead before he decided to move it. The scar was a thin, cold line under his fingers. He thought of a wand of yew and a voice like a knife drawn over stone, and blood taken from his arm by a silver knife in the dark, and something older than that, a night he could not remember and had been told about 100 times, a green light, a woman screaming, a curse that should have killed him and had broken on him instead and left a mark. The night Voldemort tried to kill me, Harry said. I was a year old. The curse rebounded. Everyone says it left a mark. His voice did not shake. He had decided years ago that it would not shake when he spoke of that night, and so it didn't. Maybe it left more than a mark. Sharpfang was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, it was slowly, the way a goblin spoke when he was building a column of figures in his head and wanted every digit right. There is old magic in a killing curse that fails. We do not study it. It is wizard sorcery and ugly. But blood magic does not care whether it is studied. If the Dark Lord's curse carried his own blood into the wound it made, if it grafted his line onto yours the way a gardener grafts one tree onto another, then the magic would not see a curse. It would see an adoption. The oldest, crudest, most binding kind, and the law that governs Hogwarts does not ask how the blood came to you, Mr. Potter. His eyes came up black and bright. It asks only whether you carry it, and you carry all four. The law that governs Hogwarts, Harry repeated. He kept his voice level, but his pulse had begun to move in his throat because he had walked into this bank to recover 1,000 galleons and a misplaced trust key, and the floor had just opened under that small grievance to show him something enormous underneath. What law is that? Sharpfang looked at him for a moment longer. Then he stood, and the motion was almost ceremonial. That, he said, is not a question I am permitted to answer at this table on my own authority. That question requires the director. He crossed to the wall and pulled a brass cord, and somewhere far away a bell rang once deep, and Harry felt the note of it in the stone of the floor. Wait here, Mr. Potter, touch nothing, and do not, whatever else you do this morning, let go of that parchment. As of this moment it is the most valuable document in Britain, and you are the only living person whose blood can prove it true. They moved him deeper. The lift that took Harry down was not the rattling cart that hauled customers to their vaults. It was a cage of black iron that descended on no chain he could see, smooth and silent, past strata of stone that grew older the lower they went, past doors marked in runes that Harry could not read and that Sharpfang would not look at. The air grew cold and then oddly warm again, a deep dry warmth like the inside of a sealed tomb that the sun had baked for 1,000 years through a mile of rock. The director receives in the Hall of Founding Treaties, Sharpfang said as the cage slowed. It is the oldest room in the bank, older than the bank, some say. The treaty that made Gringotts a sovereign house and not a wizard's counting house was signed there. So was the treaty you are about to learn of. Mind your manners, Mr. Potter. You are about to stand on the only ground in Britain that no ministry has ever owned, and you are about to learn that you stand on a second such ground every September the 1st. The cage opened. The hall beyond was vast and low, its ceiling held on pillars carved into the shapes of goblins bent under the weight of stone, and at the far end of it, on a seat of black basalt, sat the oldest goblin Harry had ever seen. Ragnarok, director of Gringotts, wore no crown because goblins regarded crowns as a wizard's affectation, but a single circlet of red gold sat on the table before him, and Harry understood without being told that it was older than any crown in any palace above the ground. The director's eyes found him and did not leave him as he walked the length of the hall. The foresealed child, Ragnarok said. His voice was a dry rasp, but it filled the room. Sharpfang's runner woke me, and I have not been woken by a runner in 40 years. Show me. Harry crossed to the basalt seat and laid the lineage parchment on the table beside the circlet of red gold. The 4 sigils still burned. Ragnarok looked at them for a long time without speaking, and his ancient face, which had surely learned to give nothing away before Harry's grandfather's grandfather was born, gave away one thing, a flicker of something that might, in a creature that allowed itself such things, have been delight. So, the director said at last, the seal wakes. After 1,000 years and 12, the seal wakes, and it wakes in the body of a half-grown wizard boy who walked into my bank to complain about a misplaced purse. He laughed, a sound like stones grinding. The gods of contracts have a sense of humor, and it is a cruel one, and I have always loved them for it. Sit, Potter, Sharpfang the charter, the true one, not the copy we let the ministry read. Sharpfang went to a door behind the basalt seat that Harry had not noticed, a slab of stone bound in iron, and laid both palms against it and spoke to it, and it opened. He came back carrying a case of dark metal as long as his arm, and set it on the table, and opened it, and lifted out a scroll. It was not parchment. It was something older, thin sheets of beaten gold, hinged, covered edge to edge in a cramped hand, 4 hands really, 4 different scripts braided together so that no single line was the work of one author. The gold was the color of deep firelight, and it was warm to look at, warm the way the deep air of the hall was warm, as if the metal held some small portion of a fire that had been lit 1,000 years ago and never allowed to go out. This is the Charter of Founding, Ragnarok said. The true instrument, written by the 4 with their own hands and their own blood worked into the gold, and given into the keeping of my house because they trusted no wizard, not even themselves, to keep it honest. The ministry believes Hogwarts is governed by a board of governors appointed under a decree of 1707. The board believes it answers to a charter held in the Department of Magical Education. That charter is a copy of a forgery, written 400 years after the founding by men who wished to believe they had been given what they had in fact only borrowed. His old eyes glittered. This is the original. Read it, Potter. Or rather, let me save you a morning of squinting at a dead hand and tell you what it says. Harry put his fingers lightly on the edge of the gold. It was warm under his hand, and the moment he touched it the warmth seemed to recognize him, to lean toward him, the firelight in the metal brightening by a shade. Ragnarok saw it, Sharpfang saw it. Neither of them said anything, but a look passed between the 2 goblins that Harry would remember. The founders built a school, Ragnarok said. But before they built a school, they built a thing they cared about far more, which was a way to keep the school from ever being stolen. They had watched kings steal monasteries and wizards steal each other's towers, and they swore that Hogwarts would never become the property of a minister or a king or a council of frightened men, so they did not give it to a council. They did not give it to the crown. They did not even give it to their own children, separately, because they had quarreled, all 4 of them bitterly, and they did not trust any one of their bloodlines alone with the whole. The director's voice slowed. Instead, they bound the castle, the lands, the lake, the forest, and the old magic in the stones into a single trust, and they sealed that trust with a condition, the quadrumvirate seal. Ownership of Hogwarts passes, entire and absolute, to any heir of their bodies who carries the living blood of all 4 founders at once. Not three in a marriage, all 4, lion, serpent, eagle, badger in one living vein. And no one ever did, Harry said quietly. No one ever did. Ragnarok inclined his head. For 1,000 years the 4 lines drifted apart, married out, failed into squibs, died, scattered into the muggle world, and the seal slept because there was no heir to wake it. So the founders had written a second clause, for the long sleep they must have known was coming. While no true owner lives, the castle is to be administered by a steward, a caretaker. A tenant of the trust who may run the school, teach the children, draw a stipend from the founder's endowment and hold the keys, but who owns nothing, who answers to the trust, and whose authority ends the instant a true owner is found. Ragnarok's gaze fixed on Harry and did not waver. The steward's title is one you will know, Potter, for it has been worn unbroken for 1,000 years and is worn today by a man you have met. The founders called the steward the headmaster of Hogwarts. The warmth of the gold was steady under Harry's fingers. Outside this hall, a mile of stone above his head, the mourning was going on in Diagon Alley, witches haggling over cauldrons, an old man asleep in the sun, none of them knowing that the floor of the world had just shifted. Harry sat very still and made himself think it through clean, one piece at a time, the way he thought through a problem when the cost of getting it wrong was high. So Dumbledore is the headmaster, he said. He is. And the headmaster is the steward. He is. And the steward is a tenant. He is the tenant, Ragnarok agreed. He has been the tenant for 53 years, the longest tenancy any steward has held, and a fine and famous tenant he has made, and the wizarding world has come to believe that the tenant is the master of the house. An easy thing to believe when the true master has not existed for 1,000 years. But the charter is not sentimental, Potter, and neither am I. The tenant holds the keys at the pleasure of the trust. And the trust, Ragnarok lifted one ancient finger and pointed it at the 4 sigils burning on the bone-colored parchment, has, as of this morning, an owner. Harry looked at the parchment. At the lion and the serpent and the eagle and the badger burning quietly, refusing to fade, the way they had refused to fade in the small black room far above. He thought about a castle he had thought of as the first home he had ever known. He thought about a corridor that had nearly killed him in his first year. a chamber that had nearly killed him in his second, a lake of dementors in his third, a graveyard at the end of his fourth, and a long string of summers spent in a cupboard, and then a small bedroom in a house where he was told daily in 100 small ways that he owned nothing and was owed nothing, and should be grateful for the little he was permitted to have. "Say it plainly," Harry said. "I want to hear it said plainly so I know I understand it." He raised his eyes from the parchment to the directors. "Who owns Hogwarts?" Ragnarok of Gringotts, director of the oldest sovereign house in Britain, looked at the boy across the table, and for the second time that morning he smiled, and this time he let it show all his teeth. "You do, Mr. Potter," he said. "The castle, the lands, the lake, the forest, the wards, the vaults beneath, the old magic in the stones, and every key that turns any lock within them. You do not attend Hogwarts." He laid one finger on the burning lion. "You own it. And the famous old man in the tower who has spent 53 years deciding your fate and the fate of every child who has ever passed under his gargoyle. He is a tenant in your house, Mr. Potter, and he has never once paid you rent." They gave him an hour and tea, which Harry did not touch because he was thinking, and when Harry was truly thinking he forgot that bodies needed things. Sharpfang sat across from him in the smaller room they had returned to, the bone parchment between them in a case of glass now, sealed, witnessed, copied 7 times into the bank's own indestructible ledger, so that no fire and no wizard could ever make it not have happened. The old goblin watched the boy think and did not interrupt, because he had learned that a client who was thinking was a client who was about to make him money, and because privately he had begun to enjoy this one. "Questions," Harry said at last. "I have a lot of them, and I'm going to ask them in order, and I'd like real answers, not comfortable ones." "Goblins have no comfortable answers," Sharpfang said. "Ask, first, is this legally enforceable, or is it just true?" Harry leaned forward. "Because those aren't the same thing, and I've learned that the hard way. It can be completely true that I own that castle and still be the case that the entire wizarding establishment decides I don't, and there's nothing I can do about it because I'm 15 and they have the ministry and the press and 53 years of everyone's good opinion. So which is it? Is it true, or is it true and enforceable?" The old goblin's eyes glittered with what was, unmistakably this time, approval. "That," he said, "is the correct first question, and it is the question a man 4 times your age would fail to ask. The answer is both, and the second is harder than the first, and you will need allies for the second who have no reason to fear the wizarding establishment because they are not subject to it." He spread his long fingers on the table. "There is precisely one such ally in Britain, Mr. Potter, and you are sitting in its bank, and it has spent 1100 years being cheated, condescended to, and locked out of wizard law by the same establishment that has spent 53 years pretending the headmaster owns your castle. The charter of founding was given into goblin keeping. The trust that holds Hogwarts is administered in law by Gringotts. Which means that you, the owner, and we, the administrators, have precisely the same enemy and precisely the same interest. We will enforce your claim, Mr. Potter, to the last clause in the last galleon, and we will enjoy it more than any work we have done in a century. That is your answer, it is true, and we will make it enforceable. Second question." Harry did not let himself feel the thing that wanted to be felt at that. There would be time for it later, when he was alone. "Why was my trust key withdrawn 3 weeks ago, and why was the Triwizard purse diverted? Because I came in here this morning thinking those were small thefts, and now I don't think they're small at all. I think someone is already managing me. I want to know who, and I want to know what they knew." Sharpfang's face did something complicated. "I will not lie to you, because lies are bad business, and you are now very good business. The instruction to restrict your trust vault came 3 weeks ago by owl under a seal we are required to honor, the seal of your magical guardian." He paused. "Your magical guardian of record, Mr. Potter, the man who has held legal authority over your accounts, your schooling, and your placement since the death of your parents, is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts." He let that sit. "The steward, the tenant. He restricted your access to your own gold 3 weeks ago. He has been doing so in small ways for 14 years. And he did all of it as your guardian and as headmaster, never, not once, with any knowledge that the boy he was managing was the one living soul on earth who could end his tenancy with a drop of blood." The room was very quiet. Somewhere above them the great bank went on counting its gold. "He didn't know," Harry said slowly, "about the blood, about the seal." "He could not have," said Sharpfang. "No one knew the seal could wake, because no one believed an heir of all 4 lines could exist. He certainly did not know that the night his dark lord failed to kill you, the failed curse grafted Slytherin's blood into the only Gryffindor Ravenclaw Hufflepuff child in the world and made him whole." The goblin's mouth bent. "Consider it, Mr. Potter. The Dark Lord spent a lifetime trying to seize Hogwarts by force. And the single act of magic by which he marked you, the act that founded your fame, the scar your whole world knows, is the precise act that handed the castle to you, free and clear by the founder's own ancient law. He made you the owner of the school he could not conquer. He will not enjoy learning that when he learns it, neither will your guardian." Harry sat back. The thing he had been holding off was very large now and very close, and it was not fear, although he had expected fear. It was something cleaner and colder and more useful than fear. For 15 years he had been a guest in every room he had ever stood in. a guest in his aunt's house on sufferance, a guest at his school on a list of others' rules, a guest in his own life managed, placed, protected, restricted, kept by an old man in a tower who had never once asked him what he wanted and had always been certain he knew best. And it turned out the tower was his. "All right," Harry said, and his voice was very steady and very quiet, and Sharpfang heard the change in it and leaned forward, because that was the voice of a client who had stopped asking what was possible and started deciding what he wanted. "Then here's what we're going to do. I want every document. The charter, the trust instrument, the stewardship clause, the guardianship papers, the record of every instruction Dumbledore has ever given regarding me or my property. I want to know exactly what I own, down to the last stone and the last enchantment, before I tell a single soul that I own it. And I want a strategy, Sharpfang, a real one, because you're right that being right isn't enough. We're going to be right and we're going to be ready, and when the wizarding world finds out who owns Hogwarts, it's not going to be because I blurted it out at 15. It's going to be because I chose the moment and the ground and the witnesses." He looked at the old goblin. "Can Gringotts do that for me?" Sharpfang stood and bowed, not the shallow nod a goblin gave a customer, but a real bow from the waist, the bow of a house to a sovereign client, the first such bow he had given a wizard in his 91 years of service. "Gringotts," he said, "would be honored to ruin your enemies, Mr. Potter. We will begin at once." They sent him back up into the daylight with a satchel. It was goblin-made, plain black leather with a clasp shaped like a closed hand, and it weighed almost nothing no matter what was put inside it, and Sharpfang had loaded it with the first of what he called the working papers. Certified copies of the trust instrument, a sworn statement of the lineage finding under the seal of the director, and a single thin folder tied in red cord that the goblin had set on top of the rest and tapped once with a long finger before he closed the clasp. "Read that one last and read it alone," Sharpfang had said. "It is the record of every instruction your guardian has given regarding you and your property since the 1st of November 1981. We compiled it this morning while you drank no tea. You will want privacy when you read it, and you will want to be sitting down, and you will want, when you have finished, to remember that knowing a thing is a weapon, and grief is not, and a clever client does not confuse the two." The old goblin had looked at him steadily. "You strike me as a clever client." Harry came out through the great bronze doors into the noise of Diagon Alley with the satchel over his shoulder and the morning sun in his eyes. And the ordinary world went on around him exactly as it had an hour before, and that was the strangest part, that a witch was still arguing with a stallholder over the price of dragon liver, that two small children were pressing their noses to the window of the Quidditch shop, that a queue had formed outside Florian Fortescue's for the day's first ice cream. And not one of them knew that the boy walking past them had gone into the bank a guest of the world and come out the owner of its oldest castle. "Oi, Harry," he turned, and the something cold and useful that had filled him in the goblin's hall loosened a notch, because two identical red-haired figures were shouldering through the crowd toward him with the particular gleeful menace they reserved for people they were fond of. Fred and George Weasley fell into step on either side of him, one slinging an arm across his shoulders, the other relieving an invisible pickpocket of nothing in particular with a flourish. "We thought that was you," said Fred. "Skulking out of Gringotts," said George, with the face of a man who's just been told something enormous. "Which face is that?" Harry asked. "That one," they said together, pointing at him, and Harry surprised himself by laughing. He did not tell them. He had decided, somewhere on the cage lift coming up out of the dark, that he would choose the ground and the moment and the witnesses, and a crowded ice cream queue with two of the worst secret keepers in Britain was none of the three. But he let them buy him an ice cream he didn't want, and he let George do an impression of Percy that was cruel and perfect, and for 10 minutes he stood in the sun and was 15, because the satchel on his shoulder was going to make sure he didn't get to be 15 for very much longer, and he knew it, and he wanted the 10 minutes. "You'd tell us, though," Fred said more quietly, when George had gone to charm a second scoop out of Florian for free. The grin was still on his face, but his eyes had gone shrewd. "If something enormous had happened, you'd tell someone." "I'm telling the right people," Harry said, "in the right order." He met the twins' eyes. "You're closer to the top of the list than you think, just not today." Fred studied him for a moment and then nodded, satisfied, because the Weasley twins understood operations better than they let anyone believe, and a man working to a plan was a man they approved of. "Right, then," he said. "When the enormous thing needs doing, and it'll need doing loudly, and it'll need doing to someone who deserves it, you come to us. We do enormous. It's practically the family trade." He clapped Harry on the shoulder. "On the house, that bit of advice. The ice cream, too." George nicked it. Harry walked home, or to the place that was called home, the narrow house on Privet Drive, where his aunt would ask no questions about where he had been, because asking would mean acknowledging that he existed, with the satchel weighing nothing and everything, and he did not open the red-corded folder on the train or in the street or under the eyes of anyone at all. He opened it that night alone in the small bedroom with the lock on the outside of the door, by the light of a wand he was technically forbidden to use, and he read every page of it, and he did not weep, because Sharpfang had been right that grief was not a weapon, and Harry Potter had decided a long time ago to keep only the things that were useful. But he sat for a long time after, with the folder closed in his lap, looking at the locked door of his guardian's choosing, and when at last he stood and crossed to the window and looked north into the dark toward a castle 300 miles away, the thing in his chest had finished cooling into its final shape, and the shape of it was certainty. He took the small square mirror from the bottom of his trunk before he slept, the twin of the one Sirius carried wherever the hunt had driven him this week, the one gift his godfather had managed to smuggle past everyone who would have stopped it, and he breathed his godfather's name onto the glass and waited and watched the surface fog and clear into a gaunt, handsome, hunted face lit by firelight from somewhere Harry could not see. "Pup," said Sirius Black, and the lines of strain in his face eased a fraction, as they always did. "It's late. You're meant to be asleep where they can keep you breathing. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Harry said. "Something's right for once, and I needed to tell one person tonight, and you're the one." He held the godfather's eyes through the glass. "I can't say all of it yet. Not over a mirror, not to anyone, not until I've got the ground under it. But I'm going to need you soon, and not to hide me or move me or keep me somewhere safe. I'm going to need you to stand next to me in a room full of people who think they own my life and watch me tell them they're wrong." He paused. "Can you do that? Stand still and let me be the one who does it." For a long moment Sirius said nothing. And something moved in his face that was not the recklessness Harry knew and not the grief, but something steadier and prouder that Harry had not seen there before, as though the man had caught, through a foot of enchanted glass, the change in the boy. "James used to make that exact face," Sirius said softly, "right before he did something that made the whole world rearrange itself around him." He smiled, and it was a young man's smile in a ruined face. "Whatever it is, pup, whoever it is, yes, I'll stand still. I'll let you do it, and then when it's done you're going to tell me every word, and we're going to laugh about it somewhere warm with the doors unlocked." His voice roughened. "Get some sleep. Whatever's coming, come at it rested." The glass fogged and went dark, and Harry lay back, and for the first time in a long time the locked door did not feel like a wall. It felt like a thing that was about to be answered for. He owned it, and he was going to claim it. And the old man in the tower was going to learn what every tenant learns, sooner or later, who forgets that he is only a tenant, that the lease was always in someone else's hand. A mile above Diagon Alley and 300 miles to the north, in a circular office at the top of a tower, a great many small silver instruments stood on a great many spindle-legged tables, and they had been turning and whirring and puffing their faint silver smoke for 53 years, and Albus Dumbledore had long since stopped consciously hearing them, the way a man stops hearing a clock he has lived with all his life. He heard them now. He heard them because at 23 minutes past 9 that morning, every one of them stopped. Not all at once, which would have been alarming but explicable, a ward failing, a monitoring charm exhausted. They stopped in sequence around the room, a ripple of silence running table to table, each delicate mechanism slowing, sighing out its last thread of smoke, and going still, as if some authority that had wound them long ago had quietly, finally, withdrawn its hand. By the time the silence reached the last instrument on the last table, Albus Dumbledore was on his feet, and the half-moon spectacles had slid down his nose, and the twinkle that lived behind them, the famous twinkle that had reassured 3 generations of frightened parents, had gone out like a snuffed candle. He crossed to the nearest table and lifted the silver instrument that had watched over Harry Potter for 14 years. It lay cold and dark in his palm. It had never once failed. It had survived his own death trials of its enchantment. He had built it to survive anything short of the boy's death, and even then it was meant to ring, not stop. It had not rung. It had simply ceased to have any authority to report, as though the question it had been built to answer, "Where is the boy? Is the boy safe? Is the boy mine to keep?" had become a question he was no longer permitted to ask. On the wall behind him, the portraits of the former headmasters of Hogwarts had all, every one of them, woken from their painted sleep, and turned their painted faces toward the great window, and were looking north and west, toward London, toward the white building over the Goblin Warren, with expressions that ran the whole range from confusion to fear. The oldest of them, a thin dark man in robes 4 centuries out of fashion, had risen from his painted chair, and was gripping the painted frame of his own portrait with both hands, and staring at nothing with the look of a man who has heard, after 1,000 years, a bell he was told he would never hear. "It cannot be," said the portrait very softly, in an accent no living tongue spoke any more. "It cannot be. There is no such child. There has never been such a child." Albus Dumbledore did not hear him. He stood in the center of his silent office with the dead instrument cold in his hand, an old man at the top of a tower he had ruled for half a century, and for the first time in a very long time he did not know what had happened, and he did not know what to do, and somewhere underneath the not knowing, in a place he did not often visit, a cold and certain voice that he had spent his whole life learning to ignore told him, quietly, that something he had borrowed a long time ago was about to be called in. He set the instrument down. He reached for a quill and a clean sheet of parchment, and he wrote 4 words and sealed them and called for a phoenix. The note said, "Where's the boy?" It would be 3 days before he learned that the boy was not lost at all. The boy knew exactly where he was. For the first time in his life, the boy knew exactly where he stood. He stood in his own house. He simply had not been told until that morning that it was his. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Owner of the castle Harry came back to Gringotts on the third day, and this time they were expecting him, and this time the doors opened before he reached them. Sharpfang met him in the great hall himself, which Harry understood to be a statement. An account manager did not leave his ledgers to greet a client at the door unless the client had become something other than a client. The old goblin wore a chain of office Harry had not seen before, 3 links of red gold over his dark robes, and he led Harry not down to the small black room but along a side corridor to a chamber Harry had not been shown. A long room with a single vast table, and on the table, laid out in careful ranks like the pieces of a siege, every document that described the thing Harry owned. "You said you wanted to know exactly what you hold," Sharpfang said. "Before you tell a soul you hold it. Good. So do we. A man who claims a castle without knowing where its walls run is a man who loses the argument over the one stone he forgot." He gestured at the table. "We worked through the night. 3 of our oldest charter readers, who between them have 800 years of practice at the kind of law wizards, stopped being able to read 4 centuries ago. This is the map of your estate, Mr. Potter. Sit and learn your own borders." Harry sat. He had slept badly for 3 nights, not from fear but from the sheer pressure of the thing, and he had filled a notebook with questions, and he opened it now to the first page. "Start with the ground," he said. "What's the actual extent of it? Where does Hogwarts end?" "It does not end where you think." Sharpfang drew a sheet toward him. A map, hand-drawn on vellum, the loch in the mountains and the castle rendered in a fine antique hand, and around it all a boundary line that Harry's eyes followed, and then followed further than he expected. "The school occupies a fraction of the domain. Founders bought, conquered, or were given a tract of the highlands that runs from the far shore of the Black Lake north into the mountains for 30 miles, west to the old Roman line, and south past the village the Muggles call nothing because they cannot perceive it is there. Hogsmeade, the goblin's nail, tapped the little cluster of buildings. The only entirely magical village in Britain, Mr. Potter, sits on your land. It pays ground rent to a trust it has been told for centuries is administered by the Crown. The Crown has never seen a nut of it. The rent has gone these 50 years into an account controlled by the steward for the upkeep of the school, which is permitted under the stewardship clause so long as a true owner does not exist." He looked up. "A true owner now exists. As of the moment your blood woke the seal, every ground rent, every lease, every tithe on this map ceased to belong to the trust and stewardship and began to belong to you. Including the arrears the steward could not lawfully have spent had he known you existed. We are calculating those. The figure has 11 digits and we have not finished." Harry wrote 11 digits in his notebook and underlined it once and did not let his face change because he had decided that the gold was the least interesting thing in this room and he did not want Sharpfang to think otherwise even for a moment. "The forest," he said, "the forbidden forest, that's inside the line. What does owning a forest like that actually mean? There are things in there, centaurs, other things. Now you ask the right kind of question." Sharpfang drew another sheet. "The forest is not a possession in the way a vault of gold is a possession. The founders did not own the centaurs, no one owns the centaurs, and the centaurs would tell you at length that the question is an insult. What the founders held and what you now hold is a compact. A treaty, Mr. Potter, sworn between the 4 and the elder races of the forest at the founding, the centaur herds, the merfolk of the lake, the older and stranger things that keep to the deep wood. Under the compact the forest governs itself, and in return its peoples acknowledge the owner of Hogwarts as the holder of the bond that keeps the human world from cutting their trees and draining their lake. For 1,000 years there has been no owner, only a steward, and the steward has let the bond go thin. The centaurs have grown insular and the merfolk distrustful, because the human party to their treaty stopped existing and they were left dealing with a caretaker who could promise nothing because he owned nothing." The goblin's eyes glinted. "You are the other party to that treaty now. The first in 1,000 years who can actually hold up the human end of it. The centaurs will know it before you tell them. They read the sky better than we read ledgers, and the sky changed 3 nights ago." Something cold and bright moved through Harry at that, not fear, the useful thing again, the sense of a structure far larger than himself clicking into place with him at the center of it. He had walked the edge of that forest. He had been hunted in it. He had not known he was its landlord. "The wards," he said. "I want to understand the wards, because I've always been told Hogwarts is the safest place in Britain, and the wards are why, and they answer to the headmaster, don't they?" "They answer," said Sharpfang, "to the holder of the keys. And the keys, Mr. Potter, are the heart of the whole matter, so listen closely." He set aside the maps and drew toward him the central document on the table, a sheet of the same warm hinged gold that Harry had touched in the director's hall, smaller, a single leaf of it. "The wards of Hogwarts are the oldest continuously maintained enchantment in the country. They were not cast, they were grown, layer on layer, 1,000 years of magic settling into the stone like rings into a tree. and at the root of them, holding them all, is a single binding the founders made, the keyring, not a ring of iron, a ring of authority. The right to command the wards, to raise them, lower them, key a person in or out, seal the gates, wake the castle's own defenses. The founders held the keyring. They gave its daily use to the steward, because a school must be run and a steward must be able to lock a door. But they did not give the steward the keyring itself. They could not. The keyring is bound to ownership. It cannot be transferred, sold, or stolen. As is only by blood to the owner, and there has been no owner. So for 1,000 years the keyring has lain dormant in the stone, and the steward has run the wards on a borrowed thread of it, enough to lock the doors at night, never enough to truly command them. Sharpfang lifted his eyes. The keyring woke 3 nights ago, Mr. Potter, for the first time since Rowena Ravenclaw last held it. It is in you. You have not felt it because you have not yet stood within the wards. When you do, you will feel it. And on that day the steward's borrowed thread will be exactly as strong as you permit it to be, and not one strand stronger. Harry was quiet for a moment, turning that over, looking for the catch, because there was always a catch, and a man who didn't find it before his enemy did was a man who lost. Then why hasn't this happened before? He said slowly. Not the blood, I understand the blood is one in 1,000 years, but the law. If this charter exists, if it's this clear, why hasn't some headmaster over 1,000 years simply destroyed it, or rewritten it, or had the goblins lose it? You said the ministry reads a forgery. Someone made that forgery. Someone wanted everyone to believe the steward was the master. Why is the real charter still here, intact in your hands? Sharpfang set down his quill. When he answered, his voice had changed. It had the flat finality of a goblin stating the one law that even goblins did not bend. Because it was given into our keeping, he said, and a thing given into the keeping of Gringotts is kept. That is not a service, Mr. Potter. It is what we are. Wizards have tried over 1,000 years to make us lose this document. They have tried to buy it, and we do not sell what is held in trust. They have tried to take it, and the last army that came into our deep vaults to take a thing that was kept did not come out, and the war that followed is the reason there are treaties between your ministry and my house at all. They have tried to forge it, and the forgery you call the ministry's charter is the result, and we let it stand, because a forgery that the wizarding world believes is a leash the wizarding world has put on its own neck, and we are patient, and we have always known that one day a single drop of the right blood would fall on the right parchment, and on that day the leash would be in our hand. His old eyes burned. You ask why the real charter survived. It survived because for 1,000 years my people have been waiting for you to walk in the door, and we did not know your name, but we knew you would come, because the founders wrote you into the gold, and the gold does not forget. 3 nights ago you came. We have been keeping your house, Mr. Potter, since before England had a king. We are very, very glad to give it back. The room was silent. Far off, the bank breathed its endless soft sound of counted gold. Harry looked at the old goblin, and then at the small leaf of warm gold on the table between them, and he understood, in a way he had not quite understood 3 days ago, that he had not stumbled into a windfall. He had walked into the end of a 1,000-year-long wait, and the people who had been waiting were not his friends, exactly. Goblins did not have friends, but they were something rarer and more reliable than friends. They were a house with a grievance and a debt to settle, and his claim was the blade they had been sharpening for 1,000 years, and they would put it in his hand and guide his arm and ask in return only that he let them watch it land. All right, Harry said. Show me the rest, the vaults, the endowment, the house elves, all of it, and then I want to see the charter again, the whole thing, the original. I want to put my hands on it. Sharpfang's mouth bent. I had hoped you would ask, he said. There's a thing the charter does, Mr. Potter, when its owner touches it, that I did not let you see in the director's hall, because the director wished to be certain of you first. We are certain of you now. He rose. Finish your questions, and then we will go down to the gold, and you will meet the 4 people who built your house, after a fashion. They left something of themselves in it. They always meant to greet the air in person, and they could not arrange to be alive for it, so they arranged the next best thing. The endowment, it turned out, was the smallest of the marvels. Sharpfang walked him through it in an hour, the founder's original gift, a sum so vast and so long compounded that the school had never once in 1,000 years needed a nut from the ministry, a fact the ministry had been at considerable pains to obscure, since a school that needed nothing from the state was a school the state could not control through its purse. The endowment paid the staff, maintained the castle, fed the children, and funded 100 quiet charities the founders had written into the trust and that no living person remembered: dowries for squib daughters, passage for hunted muggleborns, pensions for the families of witches and wizards who died protecting others. Some of those charities had quietly stopped paying out under the long stewardship. Harry made a note. He intended to restart them. The house elves were stranger, and to Harry harder. The elves of Hogwarts are not employed, Sharpfang said. They are bonded to the castle itself, which is to say in law to the castle's owner. For 1,000 years there has been no owner, so the bond has rested in the stewardship. The elves have served the school and taken their instruction from the steward, and believed, as everyone has believed, that the steward was the master. He is not their master, Mr. Potter. He never was. You are. The goblin watched him. I tell you this plainly because I am told that you, almost alone among wizards, have a conscience that troubles itself about elves, and you should know what your conscience now owns. 100 bound servants who did not choose you and who will feel the bond turn to you the instant you cross the wards, and who will obey you in all things because the deepest magic in their nature compels them to obey the owner of the house they are bound to. That is a great deal of power over a great many lives. The charter does not tell you what to do with it. That part, he inclined his head, the founders left to the heir's character. We shall see what yours is made of. Harry thought of a small elf in a pillowcase who had nearly killed him several times trying to save his life, and of a kitchen full of beings who had wept with joy at the chance to serve, and he did not answer the goblin because he did not yet have an answer he was willing to say aloud. He wrote 3 words in his notebook, bond, choice, free, and he drew a line around them, and he meant to come back to it. The vaults, he said. You said founders' vaults, plural. I have a trust vault. The Potters have a family vault. What else is there? 4, said Sharpfang. 1 for each founder, sealed at the founding, opened by no one in 1,000 years, because they can be opened by no one but the owner of Hogwarts, and there has been no owner. We do not know what is in them, Mr. Potter. Goblins have guessed for 1,000 years and never looked, because to look would be to break a trust, and we do not break trusts. He stood, and the chain of office shifted on his chest. But you may look. You are the only living thing that may. And the director has decided that today, before you decide anything else, you should go down and stand before the deepest of them and put your hand on the charter, because there is a thing your house wishes to say to you, and it has been waiting 1,000 years to say it, and a wise heir listens to his house before he commands it. They went down past the deepest vaults that customers were ever shown, past the deepest the dragons guarded, into a darkness that the cage lift took a very long time to fall through, and the deep dry warmth Harry had felt before grew, until it was like descending into the banked heart of a fire that did not burn. The cage opened on a cavern, natural stone, vast, and at its center 4 doors stood in a ring around a low dais, and each door bore a sigil Harry had now seen burned into his own blood: lion, serpent, eagle, badger. On the dais, on a stand of black iron, lay the charter of founding open, the hinged leaves of warm gold catching the torchlight and giving it back brighter than it came. Ragnarok was there, and 2 charter readers, and no one else. The director nodded to Harry once. Touch it, the old goblin said, all of it, not the edge. Lay both your hands flat upon the gold, and do not be afraid of what answers, because what answers has been asleep for 1,000 years, and it has dreamed of you the whole time, and a thing that has waited so long to meet you will not harm you in its first moment. Go. Harry climbed the dais. The charter lay open before him, the 4 braided scripts running across the gold, and the gold was warm, warmer than it had been in the upper hall, warm as a living hand. He looked at it for a moment, the deeds of his estate, the law of his house, the 1,000-year-old promise written into metal by 4 people who had quarreled and built and died, and then he laid both his hands flat upon it, palms down, fingers spread, and he felt the warmth rise to meet his skin. And the castle, 300 miles away and 1,000 feet above, answered through the gold. It came up through his hands as light first, a deep gold light that ran out from under his palms and along the braided scripts and lifted from the surface of the metal in slow threads, and then it came as sound, not heard but felt. A single low note like the deepest string of an instrument too large to exist, the note of a thing waking that had slept a very long time. The 4 sigils on the 4 doors around the cavern kindled, lion and serpent and eagle and badger, each in its own color, and the colors rose from the doors and turned in the air, and Harry felt, there was no other word for it, he felt the castle look at him. 300 miles away, the wards turned in their 1,000-year sleep and found, for the first time since Rowena Ravenclaw last held the keyring, a hand that fit. Stone that had not had an owner in 1,000 years recognized one. And the recognition came down the gold and into Harry's hands and up his arms and settled in his chest beside the certainty that already lived there, and the 2 things, the certainty and the recognition, fit together like a key in a lock that had been waiting 1,000 years for it, and turned. On the deepest of the 4 doors, the one marked with the crowned lion, something changed. The gold of the sigil ran like water and reformed, and where there had been a single lion there was now a portrait, 4 figures full length, standing together as they could surely never have borne to stand in life, painted in a hand no living painter could match because no living painter had ever seen them. A broad red-bearded man with a sword, a lean dark man with green-lit eyes and a serpent at his collar, a tall gray-eyed woman with a circlet of bronze. A round, kind-faced woman with earth on her hands and a yellow flower behind her ear. They had been sleeping in the gold for 1,000 years, the 4 founders of Hogwarts, and they woke now, and they turned their painted eyes to the boy with his hands flat on their charter, and the red-bearded man, Godric Gryffindor, looked at him for a long moment with an expression Harry could not read, and then threw back his head and laughed, a great booming painted laugh that filled the cavern. "There he is," said Gryffindor. At long last, look at him, Sal. All four of us in one skinny boy, and he's got my lion's stubborn jaw and your serpent's cold eye and Rowan's habit of working a thing out before he speaks and Helga's way of standing like he won't be moved. 1,000 years we waited and the gods sent us a perfect one. He grinned through the gold. Hello, lad, you'll be wanting your house back. We have frightened him, said the gray-eyed woman, Rowena Ravenclaw, though her voice was dry and amused and not frightened at all. He is doing arithmetic, look at his eyes. He is wondering whether we are truly the founders or some clever construct the goblins keep to comfort heirs, and whether if we are the founders we can be trusted, and whether if we can be trusted we will be useful. She inclined her bronze-circled head, and something in her gray eyes warmed by a single degree. Good. Distrust everything, child, including us. We built 1,000 years of trouble into the thing we are about to hand you. A wise heir would be doing exactly the arithmetic you are doing. Do not stop on our account. You held the keyring, Harry said. His voice came out level, which surprised him because his hands were full of light and his chest was full of the turning of a 1,000-year lock. It's awake. I can feel it. Tell me what it's for. Tell me what you built it to do. The dark man spoke then, Salazar Slytherin, and his voice was quiet and precise and cold as the deep stone, and Harry recognized the cold because it was a cousin of his own. We built it, said Slytherin, to make certain that no frightened council and no greedy king and no clever, kindly tyrant could ever own the children of magic and call it stewardship. His green-lit eyes held Harry's. We had all four of us in our lives watched power gather itself around a single throne and grow certain it knew best, and we hated it, the four of us, more than we hated each other, and we hated each other a great deal. So we built a lock that could only be opened by the one person in any age who united all that we were, and we trusted that such a person, if the gods ever made one, would understand in his blood why the lock existed, and would not become the thing the lock was built against. The serpent at his collar turned its painted head toward Harry. You understand it. I can see that you understand it. You have spent your life being owned by people certain they knew best, and you have hated it exactly as we hated it. So I will tell you the one thing you most need to hear, heir, and then we will sleep again and let the goblins teach you the rest. He leaned forward in the gold. The man in the tower is not a villain. Do not make the child's mistake of needing him to be one. He is something more dangerous than a villain. He is a good man who has been certain for 50 years that he knows best and who has never once had to ask permission because the lock that should have stopped him was asleep. You are about to wake the lock. He will not understand at first that he was ever only a tenant. He will believe sincerely that the castle is his by right of love and labor and long service, and he will fight you with all the terrible weight of a good man who is certain. And that is the most dangerous enemy there is, boy, far more than any Dark Lord, because the Dark Lord knows he is taking what is not his, and the good man does not. Slytherin's cold eyes did not blink. Hold the high ground. You have it by right. Never let him move you off it onto the low ground of his certainty. Make him prove the lease. He cannot. There is no lease. There was only a sleeping lock and a long, comfortable forgetting. End the forgetting. That is all you must do. The rest will follow. The light was sinking now, the note fading, the four founders settling back toward their 1,000-year sleep. But Helga Hufflepuff, the round, kind-faced woman, spoke last, and her voice was warm where the others had been bright and dry and cold. And she looked at Harry not as a lock's answer or a line's convergence, but simply as a boy with his hands full of light a long way underground. They have told you about the keyring and the lock and the high ground, she said, because that is what they loved, the three of them, the cleverness of the thing. But I built the elf bond, child, and the charities and the kitchens that have never let a hungry student sleep in 1,000 years, and so I will tell you the part they forgot. Her painted eyes were very gentle. It is a school. Under the deeds and the wards and the law, under all of it, it is a place where frightened children come to be made less frightened, and to be fed and kept warm and taught and loved a little, whether anyone admits to the loving or not. You are about to win it. Win it. You have every right, but when you have won it, remember what you have won. Not a castle, not a victory over an old man, a roof over a great many children who have nowhere else that is warm. She smiled, and the smile was the last of the light. You know what it is to have no roof that is warm. That is why the gods chose you, child, and not some other heir. Not because you united our blood, because you know what the house is for. Now take it back and make it warm and let the rest of us sleep. We are very tired. We have waited a very long time. The gold went quiet under Harry's hands. The portrait sank back into the sigil. The lion returned. The cavern was only a cavern, warm and dim and vast, and Harry stood on the dais with his hands still flat on the charter and his heart going hard, and he did not move for a long moment, because something had been set in him that had not been there before, and he wanted to be sure of its shape before he carried it back up into the light. When he lifted his hands at last, Ragnak was watching him from the foot of the dais, and the old director's face for once held no calculation at all. They have not spoken to anyone in 1,000 years, Ragnak said quietly. Not the stewards, not the kings, not my own predecessors who guarded them and longed to hear them. Only the owner, only ever the owner. He inclined his head, and it was, Harry realized, a bow. Welcome to your house, Lord Potter, now. Let us go up and turn what they have given you into law and take it back." Before they went up, Sharpfang took him to see one of the four founders' vaults because Harry had asked, and a goblin did not refuse a sovereign client a thing that was his. They stopped before the door marked with the badger, and Sharpfang stood back because the door could be opened by no goblin and no steward and no king, only the owner, and Harry laid his hand flat against the amber and black sigil, and the door, which had not moved in 1,000 years, knew his blood and swung inward without a sound. The vault beyond was not a vault of gold, it was a workshop. Helga Hufflepuff's vault, sealed at the founding, and inside it lay the things the kind founder had thought worth leaving to whatever heir might one day come. Shelves of seed in stoppered jars, each labeled in a round patient hand, plants that did not exist anywhere in the living world because Helga had bred them, and then the breed had died with her. A great ledger bound in green that turned out to be a 1,000-year-old record of every charity the founders had endowed and every soul those charities had saved, the dowries and the passages and the pensions, name after name after name, ordinary people kept warm by four quarreling sorcerers who had agreed on exactly one thing, which was that no child of magic should ever go cold. And on a stand at the center, a single loaf of bread, fresh, warm, uneaten, kept by an enchantment Harry could not name against the 1,000 years that had passed since it was baked. "She left bread," Harry said. He found he could not quite keep his voice level, and for once he did not try. 1,000 years, and she left the heir a loaf of bread, so that the first thing the owner did in his own house, said Sharpfang quietly behind him, would be to eat. She was, the records say, the only one of the four who was ever poor as a child, and the only one who remembered it. The other three left you weapons and books and the cleverness of the lock. She left you a meal, and a list of everyone the house had ever fed, so that you would know, before you commanded a single elf or signed a single notice, exactly what the place was for. The old goblin-seamed face was unreadable, but his voice was not. "I have guarded these doors for 91 years, Mr. Potter, and guessed at what lay behind them, and I guessed gold and treasure and old dark things. I did not guess bread. You have made a goblin feel something this morning that a goblin does not, as a rule, feel, and I will thank you not to mention it upstairs." He cleared his throat. "Take the loaf, eat it tonight. It is the oldest thing in this bank, and it was baked for you, and it will still be warm when you break it." That is the kind of magic the four were truly capable of, under all the politics. Remember it when the politics gets ugly. It is going to get very ugly. Eat the bread first. Harry took the loaf. It was warm in his hands, warm as the gold of the charter, warm as a thing made that morning by someone who loved whoever would eat it, and he carried it out of the vault of Helga Hufflepuff and up through a mile of stone into the light. And that night, alone in the small bedroom with the lock on the outside of the door, he broke it and ate it, and it was the best thing he had ever tasted, and it tasted like a home he had not known he owned. He kept the green ledger, too, the list of every name the house had ever kept warm, and he read it before he slept, and when he had finished it, he understood Helga Hufflepuff's vault for what it was, not a gift, but an instruction, the only instruction any of the four had bothered to leave, written in 1,000 years of saved lives in one warm loaf, and the instruction was, "This, and not the castle, is the thing you have inherited. See that you keep baking." That evening Harry wrote one letter, and he wrote it to Hermione Granger. Because of all the people he knew, she was the only one who would read a 1,000-year-old deed and check his reasoning instead of cheering it. He did not tell her everything in the letter. He had learned the discipline of the satchel. He told her enough. He told her that he had found, at Gringotts, a question of title concerning Hogwarts that was older than the Ministry and possibly larger than anything either of them had ever touched, and that he needed someone who could read law the way she read it, coldly, completely, looking for the hole before the enemy found it, and that he needed her to tell no one, not Ron, not yet, until he had the ground under it. He told her that he had certified copies of documents she would not believe were real. He told her to come to Diagon Alley, to a private room Gringotts was holding in her name in 3 days, and to bring her best handwriting and her worst suspicions. Her reply came back by return owl, faster than he had thought possible, and it was exactly 4 lines, and it was exactly Hermione. "I have read about the Founders' Charter. 3 sources say it was destroyed in 1612. All 3 sources are wrong then, or you are, and I intend to find out which. Of course I will tell no one. Of course I will come, Harry, whatever it is, do not sign anything until I have read it twice." He laughed out loud, alone in the small room, the first real laugh he'd had since the graveyard. Then he wrote, "Do not sign anything until Hermione has read it twice," at the top of a clean page in his notebook, and underlined it, because it was the best advice he had been given all week, and it had come from a 15-year-old, and that was exactly why he trusted it. The goblins had 1,000 years of patience and a debt to settle. Sirius had courage and a name that still frightened people. The Founders had given him the high ground, but Hermione would read the lease, and there was no lease, and she would be the one to prove it in a language the Wisengamot could not pretend not to understand. He was assembling a council, he realized, the way the founders had assembled four of themselves, one for the law, one for the gold, one for the fight, and himself for the thing none of them could be, which was the owner. He capped the ink and felt the council settle into place around the empty center that was his to fill. 300 miles to the south, in a small pink office in the Ministry of Magic, a short, broad woman who looked like a large toad in a cardigan was drafting. Dolores Umbridge did not yet know about the boy, or the blood, or the charter, because almost no one did. But she had heard at a luncheon from a governor of the board who had heard it from a goblin teller who had been too well paid to keep his mouth entirely shut, that something had stirred at Gringotts concerning Hogwarts, some question of title, some dusty matter of old deeds, and Dolores Umbridge had a particular genius, the genius of the small and patient predator, for sensing the precise moment at which a great institution's foundations had begun to shift. Because that was the moment at which a clever woman with a quill could insert a clause that would make the great institution hers. She did not know what was happening. She only knew that something was, and that wherever there was an unsettled question of who controlled Hogwarts, there was an opportunity for the ministry, for the minister, for the good of the realm, for the children, she would say, and she would mean the ministry, and she would mean herself. She dipped her quill. At the top of a clean sheet she wrote, in a hand as small and round and sweet as her voice, educational decree number, and left the number blank, to be filled in when the time came, as the times always came, for the people who were patient. In a tower 300 miles to the north, Albus Dumbledore had at last learned where the boy was not lost, not taken, but seen, 3 days running, walking into Gringotts of his own accord and walking out with a goblin-made satchel over his shoulder. And the old man stood at his window in the failing light with the cold, dead instruments behind him. And he understood, with the part of his mind that had never once been wrong about the shape of a coming storm, that the question of Harry Potter had stopped being a question he controlled. He did not yet know the size of it. But he had spent his life learning to read the weight of a silence, and the silence in his office, where 53 years of small silver certainty had stopped all at once, had a particular weight, and the weight was the weight of something coming due. He wrote to the goblins, requesting an audience. The goblins did not reply. He wrote again, more formally, invoking his office and his guardianship in the long courtesy between the bank and the school. The goblins replied on the third request in a single line on heavy paper, sealed with the director's own seal, and the line said, "The matter you inquire after no longer concerns your office. You will be contacted by the owner." Albus Dumbledore read the word owner 3 times. Then he sat down slowly in the chair behind the great desk where 18 headmasters before him had sat, and from which he had governed the wizarding world's most important institution for longer than any of them. And he looked at the word and the part of him that was certain, the part that had been certain for 50 years, the part Salazar Slytherin's portrait had named from inside a vault 300 miles away that very afternoon. That part of him stirred and gathered itself and began, quietly and sincerely and with the whole terrible weight of a good man who knows best, to prepare to fight for a castle he had never once in 53 years stopped to wonder whether he truly owned. Far to the north, the boy who did own it boarded a train with a goblin-made satchel over his shoulder and a 1,000-year-old certainty in his chest, and he looked out the window at the country going by, and he did not see fields. He saw borders. He saw the line on Sharpfang's map running 30 miles into the mountains, and a village that owed him rent, and a forest full of treaties waiting to be honored, and 100 bound servants who would feel his hand the moment he crossed the wards, and an old man in a tower preparing to tell him sincerely that none of it was his. Let him, Harry thought, let him prepare. I have the gold and the goblins and the founder's own word and the high ground, and I am not going to be moved off it. He had been a guest in every room of his life. He was going home to the one room that was his, and he was going to take it back, and he was going to make it warm. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Dumbledore the Tenant. Hermione read the charter twice, as promised, and then a third time, and when she finally set the certified copy down on the table in the private Gringotts room, she did not say anything clever or careful. She said, "Oh," in a very small voice, and then she said, "Harry, this is the most important document I have ever touched," and her hands, when she folded them on the table, were not quite steady. "I know," Harry said. "No," Hermione said, "I don't think you do, not the legal size of it, because you've been thinking about it as yours, and that's correct, but it's only the smallest part." She pulled the copy back toward her and turned it to a clause she had marked with a strip of torn parchment. "Look here. The stewardship clause doesn't just say the steward holds the keys until an owner is found. It says the steward holds them in trust, and a trustee, Harry, a trustee has duties, fiduciary duties. Everything Dumbledore has done for 53 years, every appointment, every expulsion, every contract, every nut he spent of an endowment that wasn't his, he did it as a trustee of a trust whose beneficiary, it turns out, exists. You. He didn't know you existed, which protects him from some of it, the deliberate parts, but it doesn't protect the school. Every contract he signed as owner, and he must have signed hundreds believing he was owner, was signed by someone with no authority to sign as owner. They're not void, necessarily, but they're all, every one of them, voidable at your election." She looked up, and behind the awe in her eyes there was something Harry recognized, the cold pleasure of a mind that has found the exact joint in a structure where the smallest pressure will move the most weight. You don't just own the castle. You own the power to unmake 53 years of decisions, one at a time, at will, and there is nothing he can do to stop you except persuade you not to. That's the lever, Harry, that's the whole lever. Everything he is, the entire authority of Albus Dumbledore, rests on the assumption that he had the right to make the choices he made. And he didn't, he never did. He only had the keys to lock the doors at night. Sharpfang, who had sat silent through all of this with the particular stillness of a goblin watching a wizard child outlawyer the entire wizarding establishment, made a low sound in his throat that Harry had learned over 3 meetings to recognize as approval. "Your friend," the goblin said to Harry, "should have been a goblin. She'd have eaten the bank by Tuesday," Harry said. Hermione flushed and almost smiled, and did not, because she had already moved on to the next clause. It took them 4 days. 4 days in the private room, Hermione and Harry and a rotating pair of goblin charter readers, building not a claim. The claim was settled. The claim was a drop of blood on a parchment that could not lie, but the architecture of how to assert it. Hermione's contribution, the thing Harry had brought her for and that she delivered past all his hopes, was the recognition that owning a thing and being acknowledged to own it were separated by a chasm, and that the chasm had to be crossed in the right order or not at all. You did not announce ownership of Hogwarts to a hostile world. You established it privately in instruments no one could later deny, and then you served notice formally to the one person whose acknowledgement mattered most, and you got that acknowledgement or his refusal on the record, witnessed, sealed, before a single word reached the press or the ministry. Because the moment the world learned that a 15-year-old claimed to own Hogwarts, the world would decide in an afternoon whether to believe it, and the world's decision would not be made on the law. It would be made on who looked more like they belonged in charge, a boy of 15 or the most trusted man in Britain. "So we don't fight it in the press," Harry said on the 4th night, looking at the architecture they had built. "We fight it in the only court that can't be lied to. We make him say it to my face. We make Albus Dumbledore stand in a room and either acknowledge that he's a tenant or refuse to, on the record in front of witnesses he can't dismiss, with the charter on the table where he can read it himself." He looked at Hermione. "And he'll refuse, you know he'll refuse." "He'll refuse," Hermione agreed quietly. "He won't shout, he won't deny the document, he's too clever, he'll see it's real in 30 seconds, he'll do something worse. He'll agree that the law says what it says, and then he'll explain gently, sadly, with that terrible kindness, why the law mustn't be allowed to matter just now. There's a war, you're a child, the wizarding world needs stability. He's so sorry, but he simply can't in good conscience hand the safest place in Britain to a 15-year-old in the middle of Voldemort's return, and he's sure that when you're older you'll understand." She met Harry's eyes. "And the worst part, Harry, is that some of it will be true. There's a war, you are 15, he won't be lying, that's what makes him dangerous. He'll have a real argument, and he'll believe it, and he'll be wrong, and you have to be ready to stand on the law while he stands on the war, because the law is the only ground where you're taller than he is." Slytherin's portrait had said almost the same thing, 300 feet underground. Harry did not tell Hermione that. He only nodded and reached for a clean sheet, and at the top of it he wrote in his own hand the words that would summon the most powerful wizard in Britain to a room not of his choosing, to answer a question he had spent 53 years never being asked. The request went out under the seal of Gringotts, co-signed by the owner of Hogwarts, and it did not ask whether the headmaster would attend. It informed him of the time, the place, and the subject, a matter of title, to be discussed before witnesses on neutral ground, and it offered him precisely one courtesy, which was the choice of whether to come. Albus Dumbledore came. They met on the Goblin's ground, in a high stone room in the upper levels of Gringotts that the bank kept for treaties between parties who did not trust each other, a room with a long table of grey stone and tall windows of leaded glass and no portraits, no hearth, no comfort, nothing that could carry a listening charm or a hidden ally. Harry had chosen the room himself, from 3 the goblins offered, because it had no chair at its head, only 2 long sides, and he did not want there to be a head of the table for Albus Dumbledore to drift toward and occupy out of 50 years of habit. Harry was already seated when the headmaster was shown in. That had been deliberate, too. Dumbledore came through the door in robes of deep blue, and he was exactly as Harry had always known him, the long white beard, the half-moon spectacles, the air of grandfatherly calm that had reassured a frightened world for half a century, and for one moment, one only, Harry felt the old pull of it, the pull every student felt, the desire to be approved of by the kind old man who knew best. Then he remembered the locked door on Privet Drive, and the trust vault restricted 3 weeks before he understood why, and the words on a goblin's heavy paper, "You will be contacted by the owner," and the pull let go of him clean and did not come back. "Harry," Dumbledore said warmly, stopping at the foot of the table, "my dear boy, I have been so worried." The blue eyes moved, taking in the room. The goblins ranged along the wall, Sharpfang and a charter eater, and at the room's far end, unmoving, Ragnarok himself, who did not attend meetings and had come to this one. The eyes took in Hermione at Harry's right hand with a stack of parchment before her. They took in the long table with no head. They took in last the thing in the center of the table, the charter of founding, the true one, the hinged leaves of warm gold, that the goblins had brought up from the deep vault for this and this alone. And Harry watched the old man see it, and watched the warmth in his face hold absolutely steady while something else moved far behind his eyes, and Harry thought, he knows what it is. He knew the instant he saw it. He has known this document existed for 50 years, and he has spent 50 years being grateful it stayed in a vault. "Sit down, Professor," Harry said. "Please, we have a great deal to discuss, and most of it is on the table in front of you." Dumbledore sat. He did not reach for the charter. He folded his long hands on the gray stone and looked at Harry with an expression of such gentle, patient sorrow that Harry understood Hermione had been exactly right. There would be no shouting. The man was not going to fight him with anger. He was going to fight him with love and certainty and the war, and it was going to be the hardest thing Harry had ever done to stay on the high ground while the old man stood below it, offering him every reason in the world to come down. "I think," Dumbledore said quietly, "that I know what that document is, and I think I know more or less what it says. And I think I can guess what these past weeks have revealed to you, Harry, because I am old and I have read more history than is good for any man, and there is only one reason the goblins of Gringotts would bring the charter of founding into the light after 1,000 years. His eyes were very kind and very sad. "It means an heir has been found, an heir of all four. And it means that the heir is you." He drew a breath. "I had hoped, when I felt my instrument stop 3 weeks ago, when I felt the wards turn in their sleep, I had hoped I was wrong, not because I begrudge you anything, Harry, because I am afraid of what it will cost you, and of what it may cost all of us. May I tell you why?" "In a moment," Harry said. "First, I'd like to put the facts on the table, so that when you tell me why, we're both telling it over the same facts and not two different ones." Hermione slid the first sheet across the gray stone. She did not look at Dumbledore as she did it. She had told Harry she didn't trust herself to look at him and stay cold, and she had asked to be allowed to keep her eyes on the parchment, and Harry had said yes. Her voice when she spoke was clear and flat and entirely without cruelty, which made it worse. "The charter of founding," she said, "binds Hogwarts, the castle, the lands, the wards, the endowment, and the bonded elves into a single trust, owned by any heir carrying the living blood of all four founders. In the absence of such an heir, the trust is administered by a steward, whose title is headmaster and whose authority is that of a trustee, to maintain and operate the school, draw a stipend, and hold the keys in trust for the beneficiary. The steward owns nothing. The steward may not alienate the property, may not treat the endowment as his own, and holds every power he exercises subject to the prior right of the owner, should an owner be found." She turned the sheet so the marked clause faced him. "An owner has been found. The blood test was conducted at Gringotts under the director's seal 3 weeks ago and witnessed and recorded sevenfold. It cannot be challenged. The lineage parchment reads blood, not name, and it burned all four founder sigils. As of that moment, Professor Dumbledore, your authority over Hogwarts ceased to be the authority of a master and reverted to what it always was in law, the authority of a steward exercised at the pleasure of the owner. Every power you have exercised these 53 years, you exercised as a trustee. And every contract you signed as owner, staff appointments, supply agreements, the lease of the Hogsmeade ground, the use of the endowment, you signed without authority to sign as owner, which makes each of them voidable at the election of the true owner, who is sitting across the table from you." The room was very quiet. Along the wall, the goblins did not move. At its far end, Ragnarok watched the old man's face the way a creditor watches a debtor read the sum. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. He looked at the clause. He read it. Harry saw his eyes move along the lines, unhurried, a man reading his own sentence and refusing to flinch from it, and when he had read it he sat back and laid his hands again upon the table, and the sorrow in his face had deepened into something that was almost grief, and was not quite surrender. "It is real," he said simply. "I will not insult any of us by pretending the document is forged, or the blood mistaken, or the law other than it is. It is real, and Miss Granger has read it exactly correctly, and I have known for 53 years that this day was possible and prayed it would not come in my lifetime." He looked at Harry. "Now, may I tell you why I prayed that?" "Yes," Harry said, "now you may." "There is a war coming," Albus Dumbledore said. "You know it, you saw it begin in a graveyard, you carried Cedric Diggory's body out of it, and I have failed you grievously in the weeks since by leaving you alone with that. There is a war coming, and Hogwarts is not, whatever the deeds may say, merely a castle and a tract of land and a vault of gold. It is the single safest place in Britain. It is where, when the war comes, and it is coming, Harry, 1,000 children will be sent by terrified parents, because it is the one place those parents believe their children cannot be reached. The wards that protect it are the oldest and strongest in the country, and they have been maintained, tuned, and strengthened by an unbroken line of headmasters for 1,000 years, and for the last 50 of those years they have been maintained by me." He spread his hands, and the gesture was not theatrical, it was tired. "I am not a young man, I am not a humble one either, you have seen enough of me to know it. But I am, by some distance, the most capable defensive enchanter alive, and the wards of Hogwarts answer to my hand because I have spent half a century learning their voice. If in the middle of Voldemort's return the command of those wards passes to a boy of 15, however rightful, however brave, however clever, and you are all three, then on that day the safest place in Britain becomes a fortress whose master does not yet know how to hold the gate. And the children inside it will pay for that gap in knowledge, not you, and not I, they will pay." His blue eyes held Harry's, and they were not unkind, and they were not lying, and that was the whole horror of it. "I am not asking you to surrender what is yours, Harry. I would not insult you so. I am asking you to let me hold the keys a little longer. To remain the steward, in fact, if not in name, until the war is won and you are grown, and then to hand you a castle that is whole and safe and warm, instead of a castle whose wards faltered at the worst possible moment because its rightful owner was too young to know their voice. That is all. That is everything. I am asking you, for the sake of 1,000 children who are not in this room, to be patient with a power you have every right to seize today." It was, Harry thought, a magnificent argument. It was kind and it was reasonable, and a great deal of it was true, and it offered him a way to keep his title and his conscience both, to be the rightful owner and the good boy, to win and to be loved for not pressing his win, and he felt the whole weight of it settle over him like a warm blanket on a cold night, and he understood with perfect clarity that the warm blanket was the most dangerous thing in the room. "Hold the high ground," Slytherin's portrait had said. "Never let him move you off it onto the low ground of his certainty." "That's a very good argument," Harry said. "I mean that. It's the best argument anyone could make, and you made it better than anyone else alive could, and most of it is even true. So I'm going to answer it honestly, and then I'm going to tell you what's actually going to happen, and they're going to be two different things, and I want you to understand why." Dumbledore inclined his head. "I would expect nothing less, honestly." Harry leaned forward. "If I believed you, I'd say yes. If I thought the only thing between us was the war and the wards and 1,000 children, I'd hand you the keys this afternoon and ask you to teach me their voice, and I'd mean it, because Helga Hufflepuff told me 3 days ago that the castle is a roof over frightened children before it's anything else, and I believe her, and I believe you about the war. So if it were only that, you'd have won this conversation already." He let the silence sit for one beat. "But it isn't only that, and we both know it isn't, and the proof that it isn't is sitting in a satchel under this table." He set the goblin-made satchel on the gray stone and opened the clasp and drew out the red-corded folder, the one Sharpfang had told him to read last and alone, and he laid it down, unopened, where Dumbledore could see it. "This is the record of every instruction you've given Gringotts regarding me and my property since the 1st of November 1981. I've read all of it. You restricted my trust vault 3 weeks ago, the morning after the seal woke, though you didn't know that's what you were feeling. You've been restricting it in small ways for 14 years. You placed me with my aunt over the written objection of my parents' will, which named 3 other guardians before her, all of whom you declined to contact. You intercepted letters. You declined to tell me I had a vault until I was 11, and declined to tell me its true size until just now, because you never did tell me. I learned it from a goblin." His voice did not rise. He had decided it would not rise, and it didn't. "You did all of that, Professor, sincerely, because you were certain you knew best. I actually believe that. I don't think you're a villain. I think you're something the founders warned me about, a good man who's been certain for 50 years and never once had to ask permission, because the lock that should have stopped you was asleep." He looked steadily at the old man. "Well, it's awake now. And here's the thing your argument leaves out, the thing it's designed to leave out, however sincerely. You are asking me to trust you to hold the most important keys in Britain a little longer, and you are the one person in the world whose entire history with me is a history of deciding what's best for me without ever once asking what I wanted. You're not the answer to the question of whether I can trust the steward. You're the reason the question exists." For the first time, something moved in Albus Dumbledore's face that was not sorrow and was not calculation. It was, Harry thought, recognition, the recognition of a man hearing, after 50 years, an accounting he had always known might one day be read aloud and finding it accurate. "And the war," Dumbledore said quietly. "The wards, the 1,000 children, those are not arguments about trust, Harry. Those are facts. Whatever I have done to you, and I will not defend it here, you are owed a reckoning and you will have one. The wards still do not know your hand, and the war is still coming, and a gap in the gate is still a gap in the gate. You cannot answer a fact with a grievance, however just." "No," Harry agreed. "I can't, so I won't. Here's what's going to happen, and it answers the fact, not the grievance." He nodded to Hermione, who slid a second document across the stone, this one bearing the seal of Gringotts and a blank line for a signature that was already Harry's in place. "This is a formal notice of ownership and a deed of stewardship. The notice establishes on the record, witnessed by the director of Gringotts, that I am the owner of Hogwarts and that your authority as headmaster is, from today, a stewardship held at my pleasure. The deed offers you something. Not the keys outright, I'm not a fool, and the founders didn't raise one. It offers you a defined stewardship of the wards, specifically and only the wards, for a fixed term, terminable by me at any time, under which you continue to maintain and command the castle's defenses and teach me their voice, exactly as you proposed, while every other power you have held as headmaster, every appointment and contract and nut of the endowment, reverts to me today. He held the old man's eyes. You get to keep holding the gate, Professor, for the children, for the war, exactly as you asked. You just don't get to keep deciding everything else, and you don't get to do it as the master, and you don't get to do it on trust. You do it on a signed instrument that I can revoke the instant you give me cause. That's the answer to your fact. The gate stays held, and the man holding it finally has a landlord. It was, he saw, not at all what Dumbledore had expected. The old man had come prepared to be denied, and to argue, and to grieve, and to win slowly through patience and the war and the warm blanket of his certainty, and instead the boy had conceded the entire factual point, kept the entire legal one, and offered him the keys to the gate on a leash. There was no warm blanket to be had. There was only an accurate division of a thing that had never been divided before, offered by a 15-year-old who had clearly thought about it longer and colder than Dumbledore had let himself believe a 15-year-old could. And so Albus Dumbledore did the thing that made him the most dangerous enemy Harry would ever face, the thing the founders had warned him about and Hermione had warned him about, and that Harry, even braced for it, was not fully braced for. He smiled sadly and he said, "No." "No," Harry said. "No," said Dumbledore gently, "I will not sign it. And I want you to understand that I refuse not out of pride, though I have too much of that, and not out of greed, for I have never wanted the gold. I refuse because the moment I sign that instrument, Harry, I make your ownership real in law in a way that cannot be undone. I, the most trusted man in Britain, acknowledging in writing before the director of Gringotts that a 15-year-old boy owns Hogwarts. And the instant that document exists, every enemy you have, and you have more than you know, will understand that the safest place in Britain belongs to a child who can be reached, persuaded, threatened, or killed, in a way that I, an old man with a long and frightening reputation, cannot be. By keeping the fiction that I am master, Harry, by refusing to sign, I keep a shield over you that you do not yet see you need. I will not sign your truth into the world while the world is full of people who would use it to destroy you." The blue eyes were terrible in their kindness. "You will call this another man deciding what is best for you without asking, and you will be right. I have no defense. I am simply not willing, even now, even justly accused, to hand my enemies a child by signing a piece of paper. Revoke my stewardship if you can, take the castle if you can. But you will do it without my signature, and you will do it knowing that the old man who would not sign was, this one last time, trying to keep you alive." The room was silent. Hermione had gone very still. Along the wall the goblins did not move, but Sharpfang's eyes had narrowed because a refusal to sign was, to a goblin, the single most legible act a wizard could perform. It was a party declining a contract, and a party who declined a contract had told you, precisely and forever, where he stood. Harry looked at the old man for a long moment. Then slowly he drew the unsigned deed of stewardship back across the grey stone toward himself, and he folded it once and he put it away in the satchel, and when he spoke his voice was quiet and even and colder than Hermione had ever heard it, colder than the room, cold as the deep stone the founders slept in. "All right," Harry said. "I offered you the gate, Professor. On the record in front of the director, I offered you a way to keep holding it, for the children, for the war, exactly as you asked, and you turned it down. And you turned it down for a reason that is, I'll admit, almost noble, and that comes down when you strip the nobility off it to this. You would rather be the master in a comfortable lie than the steward in an uncomfortable truth, and you found a way to tell yourself that the lie is for my protection." He stood. He did not raise his voice. "So here is what you've actually done today. You've established on the record, witnessed by the director of Gringotts and by my council, that you were offered a lawful stewardship of Hogwarts by its rightful owner and you refused it. You've put your refusal on the goblins' books where it can never be unsaid. And you've made my next step very simple, because a steward who refuses the owner's lawful terms isn't a steward anymore. He's a tenant who's been asked to sign a lease and won't." He reached into the satchel one last time and drew out a third document, the one Hermione had drafted against exactly this, and he laid it on the table, and this one he did not offer for signature because it required none. "This is a notice to quit, Professor Dumbledore. It is the instrument by which the owner of a property formally informs a tenant that his tenancy is at an end. It does not require your signature. It requires only that it be served, witnessed, and recorded, and all three are about to happen." He looked at the old man, and there was no cruelty in his face, only the level certainty of a boy standing at last on the one ground where he was taller. "You wouldn't take the lease, so you don't get the gate. You get 30 days, and then you get the door." He nodded to Sharpfang. The goblin came forward, took up the notice to quit, read aloud in gobbledygook and then in English the formula that made it law, and pressed the director's seal into the wax, and Ragnarok, from the far end of the room, inclined his ancient head to confirm it, and it was done, served, witnessed, recorded, on the only books in Britain that could not be made to forget. Albus Dumbledore looked at the notice to quit lying on the grey stone with the director's seal cooling on it, and for a long moment he did not move, and his face had gone, finally entirely still, the grandfather gone, the twinkle gone, the warm sad certainty gone, and underneath all of it something Harry had never seen there before and would not forget. The bare, cold, calculating face of the most powerful wizard in Britain, looking at a board on which a child had just somehow taken the center. "You should not have served that," Dumbledore said very quietly, and it was not a threat, and it was worse than a threat. It was a fact stated by a man who knew a great many of them. "Not because it is wrong, because it is final. A notice can be withdrawn, Harry, right up until the moment it is served. After it is served, it is a thing that has happened, and things that have happened cannot be unhappened, and now we are both committed to the ends of roads we cannot leave." He rose and gathered his blue robes, and at the door he paused and looked back, and the kindness flickered across his ruined certainty one last time, genuine and useless. "I will fight you. I want you to know that plainly so that you are not surprised, because I have always thought it a cruelty to surprise the young. I will not fight you with darkness. I am not Tom. But I have 53 years and the love of a frightened world, and the whole machinery of an establishment that does not want to learn it has been ruled by a tenant, and I will use every grain of it sincerely for what I still believe is the greater good. You have the law, you have the goblins, you have the blood, and you have, I see now, a colder head than I gave you credit for, which is the only one of those four that frightens me." He inclined his head, a steward to an owner, an old king to a young one. 30 days, then, we will see whose castle it is when they are up." He left, the door closed behind him, and in the silence that followed, Hermione let out a long breath and said in a small, unsteady voice, "Harry, he's going to go to the ministry tonight. He has to. The only way he keeps the gate now is to find a bigger master to hand it to, one even you can't evict, and there's only one of those in Britain." "I know," Harry said. He was still looking at the door. "I was counting on it." She turned to stare at him. "You wanted him to go to the ministry." "I wanted him on the record refusing my lawful terms before he did," Harry said, "which he now is. Whatever he and the ministry build against me over the next 30 days, they build it on top of a sealed document that says I offered the great Albus Dumbledore a fair stewardship, and he turned it down to keep a lie. When this becomes a war for public opinion, and it will, that's the only ground he can win on. That document is the first thing every witness sees." He picked up the satchel. "He taught me something just now, actually. He said a notice can't be unserved, that things that have happened can't be unhappened. He's right, so from here on I only do things I'm willing to have happened." He looked at Hermione, and the cold eased just slightly into something almost like a smile. "Come on. We've got 30 days and an entire establishment about to come down on our heads, and a castle that doesn't know it's mine yet. I think it's time I went home and let it find out." They did not celebrate the serving of the notice to quit, because Sharpfang had taught Harry that you celebrated a thing when it was finished and not a moment before, and this was not finished. It had barely begun. But that night in the private rooms above the bank, Sirius came in out of the dark with the hood of his traveling cloak still beaded with London rain, and he had heard by the goblin's own discreet channels what had happened in the treaty room, and he crossed the floor and took Harry by both shoulders and looked at him for a long moment without saying anything at all. "You served notice on Albus Dumbledore," Sirius said finally, to his face, in a room he didn't control, and he walked out the loser. He shook his head slowly, and something that had been bent in him for 14 years seemed for a moment to straighten. "I spent 12 years in Azkaban being managed by that man's certainty even from inside a cell. Do you know what it does to me, pup, to watch a 15-year-old do in an afternoon what every grown wizard in Britain was too frightened of his reputation to attempt in 50 years? His voice roughened. "Your father would have charged him head-on and lost. Your mother would have out-argued him and been overruled anyway. You did the thing neither of them could have. You made him sign his own defeat by refusing to sign your victory. That's not Gryffindor, and it's not even Slytherin. That's just you." "He's not beaten," Harry said. He sat on the edge of the table, and the cold, useful thing in his chest had not loosened, because he did not let it loosen until a thing was done. "Hermione says he'll go to the ministry tonight. Not to fudge, to someone quieter, someone in education, and he'll plant an idea and walk away and let it grow without his fingerprints on it. He's going to try to find a bigger master to hand the castle to, one even I can't evict, and the only bigger master in Britain is the state." "Then we get ahead of the state," Sirius said. "We can't get ahead of it," Hermione said, from the chair where she had been working through a stack of the Goblin's Precedents by candlelight, not looking up. "That's the wrong frame. We can't outrun the ministry. It's bigger than us and faster than us, and it owns the newspaper. But we don't have to outrun it, Sirius, because we're not on the same road." She set down her quill and looked at them both, and her eyes had the bright, cold clarity that Harry had brought her there for. "Everyone keeps thinking about this as a fight over who controls Hogwarts. Dumbledore thinks it. Fudge will think it. The board thinks it. And as long as everyone's fighting over control, the biggest player wins, and the biggest player is the state every time. She tapped the precedent in front of her. But it was never a fight about control. It's a fight about jurisdiction. The founders didn't build a castle the state could control well or badly. They built a castle the state has no power over at all ever, full stop, written into gold 1,000 years before there was a ministry. We've been letting the enemy choose the battlefield. The battlefield they want is who should run the school in wartime, because on that field the state always wins. The battlefield we want is, does the state have any authority here whatsoever, because on that field the state already lost 1,000 years ago and just hasn't been told. She closed the book, so we don't get ahead of them, Harry. We let them charge as hard as they like at the question of who controls Hogwarts, and then, at the moment of their choosing to strike, we prove they were never even standing on Hogwarts' jurisdiction to begin with. We let them build the whole machine, and then we show them it was never plugged in. Harry looked at her for a long moment, and then he began slowly to smile, the first real smile since the treaty room. "You've found it," he said, "the sovereignty clause. You've actually found the thing that turns their whole attack into a confession." "I found it 2 days ago," Hermione said primly, picking her quill back up. "I've been checking it 3 times before I told you, because you have a bad habit of believing me the first time, and one of us has to be careful." But the corner of her mouth had turned up, and Sirius was laughing his great barking laugh that the Dementors had never quite managed to kill, and for a moment the 3 of them were only a wronged man, a clever girl, and a boy who owned a castle, sitting in a warm room above a goblin bank, plotting the downfall of an entire establishment, and it was, Harry thought, the closest thing to family he had ever had. "Let them build the machine," he said, "and then we show them it was never plugged in." "Write it down, Hermione, exactly like that. I want to say it to a courtroom someday." Albus Dumbledore did go to the ministry that night, exactly as Hermione had said he would, but he did not go to Cornelius Fudge, because Cornelius Fudge was a frightened man who would do precisely the wrong thing for precisely the right reasons, and Dumbledore needed something subtler than panic. He went instead to an old acquaintance in the Department of Magical Education, and he spoke for an hour carefully about a hypothetical, a question of title at Hogwarts, a young and untested claimant, the danger to 1,000 children of an unstable succession in a time of war, and he planted, in the fertile ground of a bureaucrat's ambition, the single idea that he knew would grow on its own without his ever having to water it again. That perhaps in such uncertain times, the safest hands for Hogwarts were neither an old man's nor a boy's, but the steady, impartial, permanent hands of the ministry itself. He did not know that the idea was already growing. He did not know that in a small pink office 2 floors up, a short, broad woman had already written educational decree number at the top of a clean sheet and left the number blank. He did not know that he had just become, without intending it, the most respectable voice in a chorus that would shortly try to take the castle not for the boy and not for the old man but for the state, and that the state, once it had the castle, would have no more intention of giving it back to Albus Dumbledore than to Harry Potter. He went home to his tower, to the cold, dead instruments and the woken portraits, and he sat down at the great desk where 18 headmasters had sat before him. And he began, sincerely, for the greater good, to plan how to save a castle by handing it to people who would never give it back, and 300 miles to the south, in a small pink office, a quill dipped itself in green ink, and began, in a hand as sweet as poisoned sugar, to fill in a number that had been waiting patiently. For exactly this, Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, claiming the castle, Harry went to Hogwarts on the 7th day of the 30, and he did not go quietly, and he did not go alone, because Sharpfang had taught him that there was a kind of power that lived entirely in being witnessed, and a claim made in an empty corridor was worth nothing, while the same claim made in front of the right eyes became a fact that the world had to swallow. So he chose his witnesses with care. He brought Sharpfang in his chain of office as the voice of Gringotts and the administrator of the trust, because no one in Britain could call a goblin's account of a goblin document a lie and be believed. He brought Hermione with the certified copies in a satchel of her own, because he wanted a second person in the room who could read the law aloud if anyone pretended not to understand it. He brought Sirius Black, and this had cost 3 nights of argument, because Sirius was a wanted man, and bringing him into Hogwarts was a risk Harry would not have taken for any smaller reason. But the Founder's magic was about to recognize an owner, and Harry wanted, standing at his shoulder when it happened, the one adult in the world who had promised to stand still and let him do it, the one person present who loved him and wanted nothing from him. And he had arranged, through channels Sharpfang opened and Harry did not look at too closely, for 2 more witnesses to be present whom he had not invited and did not control, a governor of the board and an observer from the ministry. He wanted the establishment in the room. He wanted them to see it with their own eyes, so that when they went back and reported it impossible, there would be 2 of their own who knew it was not. They came up the long drive to the castle in the slanting gold of late afternoon, and Harry stopped at the place where the wards began. He had crossed that line 100 times without feeling it, Every student crossed it. It was the boundary of the school's protection, invisible, ordinary, a thing you passed through on the carriages without a thought. He stopped at it now because Sharpfang had told him he would feel it, and he wanted to feel it before he stepped across, wanted to know the exact moment because the founders had told him to listen to his house before he commanded it, and he intended to. Here, Sharpfang said quietly beside him. Do you feel it? He felt it. It was not like any magic Harry had touched. It did not crackle or burn or pull. It was vast and slow and very old, a presence the size of the mountains it was built into, and it lay across the land in front of him like a sleeping animal the size of a country, and as he stood at its edge it became aware of him. Not the way a guard becomes aware of an intruder. The way a dog, asleep by a fire for 1,000 years, becomes aware that the hand on its head is the hand it has been waiting for, the one hand in all the world it was bred to know. The wards of Hogwarts woke under Harry Potter's attention the way the charter had woken under his hands in the deep vault, and the keyring that had slept in the stone since Rowena Ravenclaw last held it turned, 300 feet of foundation and 1,000 years of settled enchantment turning over all at once to face him, and a single low note rang out across the grounds that no one heard with their ears and everyone felt in their teeth. Behind him, Sirius made a low sound. The governor of the board, a thin, nervous man named Gringotts who had come expecting a tedious afternoon of legal theater, had gone white. The ministry observer had stopped walking. Hermione's hand had found Harry's sleeve. It knows you, Sharpfang murmured, and there was something in the old goblin's voice that Harry had never heard there, an awe that goblins did not give to wizards. 1,000 years it has waited, and it knows you on the far side of its own threshold. Step across, Lord Potter. Let it have you, you have listened, now let it answer. Harry stepped across the line. The land knew him. It went through him as the wards had gone through him at the edge, but multiplied now, complete, because he was inside the thing instead of standing at its door, the whole vast sleeping animal of the castle's magic rising up the moment he was within it and folding itself around him, recognizing, claiming, claimed. He felt the wards along 30 miles of border light up like a circulatory system suddenly fed, every layer of 1,000 years of enchantment finding, at last, the hand they had been grown to fit. He felt the lake turn over in its deep bed, the merfolk in their cold halls lifting their heads. He felt the forest stir, mile on mile of it, the old trees and the older things beneath them registering that the human party to a 1,000-year-old treaty had finally come home. And he felt this was the strangest and the most overwhelming, and it nearly took his knees. He felt the castle itself, the stone, every block of it quarried and set by hands 1,000 years' dust, become aware of him as a body becomes aware of its own heartbeat, and turn toward him, all of it, the whole impossible weight of it, and know him and want him and welcome him home. He did not fall. He had decided he would not fall, and so he didn't, but it was the hardest thing he had ever decided. He stood at the edge of the grounds with the late sun on the towers and the whole living weight of Hogwarts pouring its recognition into him, and he made himself breathe, and he made himself stay standing because there were witnesses, and an owner who fell to his knees the first time his house touched him was an owner the establishment would call a child playing at lordship. So he stood. And after a moment that felt like an hour and was perhaps 3 seconds, the flood settled and banked and became a steady warm pressure at the back of his mind, a presence, a thing that was now simply there and would be there for the rest of his life, the castle awake, his attending him. Merlin's beard, whispered the governor, Gringotts, who had not meant to speak. It's true, it's actually, the wards I felt them turn. I've sat on the board for 11 years and I've never felt the wards do anything, and they just turned around him like. He stopped, because there were no words in the ministry's vocabulary for what he had felt, and he was an honest enough man to know it. Like a lock opening, said Hermione quietly. Write that down, Governor, you'll want to remember the exact words when they ask you. The wards opened around him like a lock. They walked up to the castle, and the castle made way for its owner. It was subtle at first, and then it was not subtle at all. The great front doors, which were charmed to require a touch and a word from a member of staff, swung open before Harry reached them, smoothly, soundlessly, the way a door opens for the master of a house and not for a guest. The torches in the entrance hall, which burned on a slow, ancient rhythm of their own, brightened as he passed beneath them, one after another down the length of the hall, a wake of light following him in. The staircases, the famous treacherous staircases that moved on their own whims and stranded students on the wrong floors for sport, went still as he set foot on the first of them, and then turned all of them, the whole vast shifting architecture of the moving stairs settling into a single straight unbroken flight from the entrance hall to the place Harry had not told anyone he was going, the place the castle had decided before he did that its owner would naturally want to go first. It took him to the headmaster's tower. Harry had not chosen it. He understood, climbing the stairs the castle had laid for him, that the castle had chosen it, that the castle was bringing its owner to the highest seat in the house, the way a horse brings a rider to the gate it knows, and he let it because he wanted to see what would happen, and because he had begun to understand that letting the castle show him what it wanted was itself a kind of listening the founders would have approved of. At the top of the moving stair stood the gargoyle. It was the guardian of the headmaster's office, a great stone griffin that had stood at that turning for 1,000 years and admitted no one without the password, and it had refused entry to ministers and to aurors and once, famously, to a dark lord, and it stood now exactly as it had always stood, immovable, ancient, the last and proudest of the castle's small, loyal guardians. Albus Dumbledore had given it its passwords for 53 years. It had never once let him down. Harry stopped in front of it. He did not know the password. He had not been given it. No student was ever given it. He stood in front of the gargoyle that guarded the seat of the man he had served notice on, and the gargoyle, which had refused a dark lord, looked at the boy in front of it with its blank stone eyes, and then, with a grinding of stone on stone that had not been heard in living memory, it bowed. It bowed. The great griffin folded its stone forelegs and lowered its proud stone head, and stepped aside and swung open the wall behind it onto the spiral stair. And it did this not because Harry knew a password, but because the gargoyle, like the doors and the torches and the stairs, was bound to the castle, and the castle was bound to its owner, and its owner had come home, and a thing that guards a house does not ask the master for a password to enter his own tower. Sirius made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else. The ministry observer, a careful gray man who had said almost nothing all afternoon, had begun very quietly to take notes, and his hand was not quite steady. "It bowed," said Gringotts faintly. "The gargoyle bowed. It's never Albus has to give it the password every single time. I've seen him do it, and it just bowed," Hermione finished. "To the owner, yes, you're getting the pattern now, Governor. Everything in this castle that was ever bound to serve it is going to do this all afternoon to him in front of you. I'd keep writing if I were you." Harry climbed the spiral stair, and at the top of it, in the round office full of cold, dead instruments and woken portraits, Albus Dumbledore was waiting. He had known they were coming. Of course he had known. He had felt the wards turn the instant Harry crossed the line, felt it the way a man feels his own house shift on its foundations, and he had come up to his office and waited because he had decided in the 7 days since the Goblin's Room that he would not flee his own tower like a thief, and that if the castle was going to declare itself in front of witnesses, he would at least be present to witness it, and to speak, and to make, with whatever was left to him, the case he still believed. Stood by the great window with his hands folded, and the portraits of 18 dead headmasters watched from the walls, all of them awake now, all of them silent, all of them looking not at Dumbledore, whom they had watched for 53 years, but at the boy coming up the stair, because they too were bound to the castle, and they too had felt the owner come home, and a portrait that hangs in a house knows its master when he climbs the stair. "Harry," Dumbledore said, "you felt it cross the line then, the recognition." "I felt it from here. There has been nothing like it in the castle since I came, and I have been here a very long time." He looked, Harry thought, older than he had in the Goblin's Room, not weaker, but older, a man standing in the last of a long afternoon. "I will not pretend it is not happening. The doors, the stairs, the gargoyle, I have already heard. The castle tells me things. It has always told me things, and now I understand that it told me as a courtesy and not as a duty, and that the courtesy is ending. It knows you. I cannot make it not know you. No one can. That part is beyond argument, and I have never wasted breath arguing with a fact." His blue eyes moved to the witnesses crowding into the round room behind Harry, the goblin, the girl, the gaunt, dangerous man. Dumbledore's eyes widened a fraction to recognize the governor, the ministry observer with his notebook. "You have brought an audience." "I've brought witnesses," Harry said. "There's a difference, and you taught it to me in a way. A thing that happens in front of the right witnesses becomes a thing that happened. You said it yourself, things that have happened can't be unhappened. I'm making this one happen in front of a governor of your board and an observer from your ministry, so that when they tell their masters the castle bowed to me, there are 2 of them and they can't both be dismissed." He stepped into the center of the round room, and the castle's presence at the back of his mind brightened, eager, attending, and he let it. "I didn't come up here to gloat, Professor. The stairs brought me here. I didn't choose it. But since I'm here and since they're watching, I'm going to do the thing I came to the castle to do, and I'm going to do it where you can see it, because you deserve to see it after 53 years. I'm going to let the house finish recognizing me, all of it, not just the wards and the doors, the deepest bond in the place. And I want you to watch, because you, of everyone alive, are the one who needs to understand that it isn't a trick or goblin theater or a clever boy with forged papers. It's the Founder's own magic, and it's answering me, and it was never, ever going to answer you, because you were only ever holding the keys at night." He held out his hand, palm up, in the center of the round office, and he reached, not with his hand, with the new thing at the back of his mind, the presence, the keyring that had turned in the stone, and he called the deepest bond in the castle to come and be acknowledged. He called the elves. They came the way light comes, all at once and from everywhere, 100 small displacements of air filling the round office and the stair below it and the landing beyond, 100 elves in the castle's livery appearing where they had been working a heartbeat before, pulled not by any summons they had ever felt before, but by the deepest law of their nature, finally finding the thing it was made for. They came confused. Harry saw it on the nearest faces, 100 elves who had served Hogwarts all their lives and believed, as everyone believed, that they served the headmaster, suddenly feeling the bond at the root of them turn like a compass needle that has spent 1,000 years pointing at a false north and at last swung true. They looked at Dumbledore by old habit, the way they had looked to him for 53 years. And then one by one, and then all at once, they stopped looking at Dumbledore and turned and looked at Harry. The bond transferred. Harry felt it happen, felt 100 threads that had lain slack in the stewardship for 1,000 years lift and find him, and draw taut gently, not as chains, but as the simple click of a thing connecting to the thing it was built to connect to 100 lives, bound to the castle, and the castle bound to him. And so 100 lives now turned, in the deepest part of their magic, toward the boy in the center of the round room. It was the most power Harry had ever held, and it frightened him more than the wards had, because the wards were stone and the elves were people, and Helga Hufflepuff had warned him, 300 feet underground, exactly what it would feel like to hold 100 bound lives in his hand, and have the Founder's Law refuse to tell him what to do with them. A small elf at the front, older than the rest, with great green eyes and the castle's crest on her tea towel, sank to the floor in a deep bow, and her thin voice shook when she spoke, and what she said made the round room go entirely silent. "Master has come home," said the elf. "The old master, the true master, the one the bond was made for. We feels you, sir. We feels the bond come true. 1,000 years we serves the house and waits for the hand that fits, and the hand has come, and it is yours." She lifted her enormous eyes to him, brimming. "Hogwarts is yours, Master Harry Potter. We is yours. What is your will?" And Harry Potter, who had spent his life being owned, stood in a tower he now owned, with 100 bound lives turned toward him waiting to be commanded. And he understood that this was the moment the Founders had built the whole 1,000-year lock to arrive at, the moment when the heir who united all that they were held absolute power over a great many lives, and had to choose, in front of witnesses, what kind of owner he would be. Slytherin had told him to hold the high ground. Helga had told him what the house was for, and Harry made his choice, the first true command of his ownership, and he made it deliberately, in front of the governor and the ministry observer and the dead headmasters in their frames and Albus Dumbledore by the window, because he wanted it witnessed most of all. He knelt. He, the owner, knelt down on the stone floor of his own tower so that his eyes were level with the old elf's, which no master of that castle had done in 1,000 years, and he said clearly, so that every elf in the room and on the stair could hear him, "My will is this. I acknowledge the bond. I won't pretend it isn't real or set you free in a way that would hurt you. Hermione will tell you I've thought about this more than is good for me, and I know that breaking the bond carelessly would be a cruelty, not a kindness, so I keep it. But I change its terms today by the authority of the owner and let it be witnessed." He looked from the old elf to the 100 faces behind her. "From this hour no elf bound to Hogwarts can be commanded to harm itself, to punish itself, or to obey an order that would break its own heart. From this hour every elf bound to this castle is owed honest wages and a name, and the right to refuse cruelty from anyone, master or master's guest or headmaster, and to come to me when cruelty is asked of them, and I will answer. The bond stays because you want it to stay, and breaking it would harm you. But it is a bond between a house and the people who keep it warm, not between a master and his property, and from today it will feel like the first thing and never again like the second." He held the old elf's enormous eyes. "That is my will. Does the bond accept it?" The old elf began to cry, which elves did easily, and she pressed her face to the stone floor at his knee, and the bond, Harry felt it, all 100 threads of it, did something he had not known a bond could do. It warmed. The taut threads, which had drawn tight with the cold compulsion of 1,000 years of law, eased and warmed and settled, and became something that was still a bond and was no longer a chain, and a sound went through the 100 elves in the room and on the stair that was not weeping and was not cheering but was somehow both, the sound of a great many small beings feeling, for the first time in 1,000 years, that the thing that owned them had just chosen to belong to them back. "It accepts," whispered the old elf. "It accepts, Master Harry. Oh, it has never felt like this. In 1,000 years it has never felt like this." By the window Albus Dumbledore had gone very still, and when Harry rose and looked at him, he saw on the old man's face a thing he had not expected to see and would think about for a long time afterward. Not anger and not defeat, but something that looked almost like grief, the particular grief of a good man watching a younger one do, in 30 seconds and by right, a kindness that the older man had had the power to do for 53 years and had never quite found the time, because there had always been a war and a greater good, and 1,000 reasons that the small warm thing in front of him could wait. "I never changed the bond," Dumbledore said quietly. It was not to Harry quite, it was to himself, to the room, to 53 years. "I had the keys, I could have eased at any time. I told myself it was ancient and not mine to touch, and that there were larger things, there were always larger things." He looked at the weeping, warming elves and at the boy who had knelt to them, and the last of something went out of his face. Some final certainty Harry had not known was still there until he watched it leave. "You knelt to them," the old man said. "In front of the governor of your own board, with your claim still unsettled and every reason in the world to look strong, you knelt down on the floor to an elf. That was either the most foolish thing I have ever seen a claimant do, or it was the single act that proves the founders chose correctly, and I find to my own surprise that I do not think it was foolish. He drew a slow breath. I have been telling myself for 7 days that I fight you for the children. I see now that I have also a little been fighting you because I could not bear to learn that a boy might hold this place better than I have. That is vanity, and I am too old for it, and I am ashamed of it, and it changes nothing because the war is still real and the wards still know your hand for only a single afternoon. But I wanted to say it aloud in front of witnesses, since you taught me the value of that. You will hold this castle kindly. I no longer doubt it. I doubt only that you can hold it safely yet against what is coming, and on that and that alone I will still fight you sincerely to the end of the 30 days. The castle was not finished showing its owner what was his. As Harry came down out of the headmaster's tower with his witnesses behind him, the straight, unbroken stair did not carry him toward the entrance hall, as he expected. It turned under his feet and carried him down and down past the dungeons, toward the lake, and Harry let it, because the presence at the back of his mind was leaning that way, the way a hound leans toward a thing it wants its master to see, and he had learned already to follow the leaning. The corridor it laid for him ended at a door he had never seen in 5 years of living in the castle, a door of black stone in the foundations below the waterline, and it opened before him onto a chamber whose far wall was not stone at all but water, the black lake itself, held back by a 1,000-year-old enchantment as clear and solid as glass, so that Harry stood at the bottom of the loch and looked out into its green deeps as though through the side of an aquarium the size of a valley. And the merfolk were waiting. They had come up out of their cold halls in the deep water, 100 of them more, ranked in the green dark beyond the glass wall with their spears lowered and their fierce pale faces pressed close to the barrier, and at their head hung an ancient mermaid with a crown of freshwater pearls and a face seemed like the bed of the lake. And when Harry stepped into the chamber every one of them went still, and then as one they bowed, a slow ripple of bodies bending in the water, spears dipping. The whole drowned court of the lake lowering itself before the boy at the glass. They have not done that, said Gringotts faintly behind Harry. In any record the board keeps, the merfolk do not acknowledge the headmaster, they tolerate him. Karkaroff tried to treat with them for the tournament and they laughed at him through the ice. They've never bowed to anyone. They're not bowing to anyone, said Hermione softly. They're bowing to the owner, the compact, write it down, governor. The ancient mermaid drifted forward until her crowned head was a hand's breadth from the glass, level with Harry's, and she spoke, not in the screeching above water language Harry had heard at the tournament, but in something that came through the barrier as a low, cold music he understood without knowing how, the way he had understood the snake at the zoo a lifetime ago, the way Slytherin's blood understood things older than speech. We felt the bond wake, sang the mermaid queen, in the deep water where we keep the old treaty written in current and cold. 1,000 years we have guarded our end of it and waited for the human party to return, and the stewards came and went and could promise nothing, and the water grew dark with our distrust. Her pale eyes held his. You are the other party. We feel it in the lake. The bond that keeps the draining engines and the dredges of the human world from our deep is held again in a living hand, and the hand is yours, child of the Four. We bow to the treaty, not to you, but the treaty is you now, so it is the same thing. It's the same thing, Harry agreed quietly, and he laid his hand flat against the cold glass wall, and the mermaid queen laid her webbed hand against it from the other side, owner and elder race touching through 1,000 years of enchantment, and the whole drowned court behind her lifted their spears and shook them in the green dark, and a sound came through the water that was the merfolk's fierce cold cheer, the first time it had been raised for a human being since the founders themselves stood where Harry stood. Tell your people, Harry said to the queen, that the owner has come home and the treaty is held, and nothing of the human world will ever again come into your water while I hold the bond. And tell them I'll come back properly with time, to renew it the way it deserves to be renewed, face to face, not through a wall. They've waited 1,000 years for the human party to be worth talking to. I don't intend to make them wait much longer. The queen sang something that Harry felt as assent and as something warmer than assent, and then the court of the lake sank back into the green deeps, spears flashing, and the water beyond the glass was only water again, vast and cold and dark, but held now entreated in his. Harry took his hand from the glass and turned to find the ministry observer staring at him with his notebook forgotten at his side and his careful gray composure entirely gone. Write it down, Harry told him gently. All of it, the merfolk bowed. You'll want to have written that you saw it when they ask you whether the castle truly knows its owner. It knows him down to the bottom of the lake. There was one more thing, and the castle did it without being asked. As Harry turned to go, the recognition complete, the witnesses sated, the elves dispersing in their warm new quiet to 100 tasks. The door of the cabinet behind the headmaster's desk swung open of its own accord, and out of it, off its high shelf, came the sorting hat, tumbling down through the air to land on the desk with a soft thump, and it sat up, its brim creasing into the old shrewd face that had read the heart of every child in Britain for 1,000 years. And it looked at Harry across the round room. "I wondered," said the Sorting Hat, "when you would finally come up here. I have been waiting since the 1st of September of your first year, when I sat on your head and very nearly put you in Slytherin, and could not understand why a Gryffindor boy rang with all four of our voices at once. I thought I had imagined it. I am 1,000 years old, and I had decided for the first time in my life that I had imagined a thing." The Hat's creased face turned toward Dumbledore, then back to Harry, and its voice, which had sorted every headmaster in the room's portraits, took on the weight of the one artifact in the castle that the founders had made of all four of themselves, the only object in Britain that held a piece of each of their minds. "I'm Godric's Hat and Salazar's and Rowena's and Helga's. They put something of each of themselves in me so that their judgment would outlive them, and it has for 1,000 years in the heart of every child I have sorted. And I will tell you, boy, and I will tell this room, and the portraits may carry it to whatever headmaster comes after, what no one else alive can tell you, because I was there inside their minds when they built the lock." The Hat's old eyes fixed on Harry. "They did not build it to make an owner. Owners are cheap. Any deed makes an owner. They built it to find an heir who would not need to be told what the house was for, and you knelt to the elves. So I will say the thing I was made to say to the one who came and have waited 1,000 years to say, and now will say at last." The Sorting Hat, the founder's own voice, inclined its ancient brim to the boy in the center of the round room. "Hogwarts knows its lord. Be welcome and be worthy, and the castle is yours." And the castle answered. Came up through the floor of the tower and down through the great windows all at once, the deepest magic in the stone, the founder's own working, and it filled the round office with a light that was 4 colors and no color, gold and green and bronze and amber braided into a single brightness that was the brightness of the warm hinged gold of the Charter 300 feet underground. The same fire, the same 1,000-year-old fire, rising now through the whole body of the castle to crown its owner. And 300 miles in every direction the wards blazed up to their full ancient strength for the first time since the founders died, and the lake shone, and the forest sang in 100 old voices, and in the great hall far below the 4 house banners on the walls rippled though there was no wind, and the enchanted ceiling which showed the sky, showed for one impossible moment not the evening sky over Scotland, but a sky that no longer existed, the sky of 1,000 years ago. The sky the founders had stood under when they laid the first stone, and then it settled, all of it, the light banking down into the steady warm presence at the back of Harry's mind, the castle quieting around its lord like a vast animal lying down at last beside the one it had waited 1,000 years to lie down beside. When it was over, the round office was ordinary again, old and dim, and full of cold instruments and woken portraits and stunned witnesses, and Harry Potter stood in the center of it, and he was not changed to look at, a thin boy in a dark coat with untidy hair and a thin scar, but everyone in the room understood that something had happened that the law would now have to spend a great deal of effort pretending had not, because 2 of them worked for that law, and they had felt it in their teeth. "Write it all down," Harry said quietly to the ministry observer, who had stopped pretending to take notes and was simply staring. "Every word of it, the wards, the gargoyle, the elves, the hat, the light. I want your report honest, because your honest report is the most valuable thing in Britain by tomorrow morning, and your masters are going to want you to file a dishonest one." He looked at the gray, careful man. "Don't. Whatever they offer you, and they'll offer you a great deal, file it honest." You felt the ward's turn, you can't unfeel that, be the man who wrote down what he felt. The observer looked at him for a long moment, then he looked down at his notebook and back up, and he said in a careful gray voice that had found, somewhere in the last hour, a small hard floor of its own, "It bowed, the gargoyle bowed, I'll write that it bowed," and he wrote it. Greengrass the governor had sat down heavily in a chair that had appeared for him because the castle was being courteous to its owner's guests, and he was looking at Harry with the expression of a man whose entire understanding of how power worked in Britain had been rearranged in the course of a single afternoon. "The board," he said faintly. "I have to report to the board. Lucius, the board chairman, he sent me here expecting a boy with forged papers. He's going to ask me what I saw." He swallowed. "What do I tell him I saw?" "Tell him the truth," Harry said. "Tell him you saw a castle recognize its owner, in the founder's own magic, in front of a ministry observer, and that there is no forgery and no trick, and no version of this where the boy doesn't own the castle. Tell him that." He held the frightened governor's eyes. "And then watch what he does, governor, because how Lucius Malfoy reacts to being told the castle is genuinely mine will tell you exactly what kind of man you've been working for. A man who wanted the truth will accept it. A man who wanted the castle will try to take it anyway, now that he knows it's real and valuable and held by a boy of 15. I think you'll find out which he is by Friday. Pay attention. You may want to choose a different side before this is over, and I'd rather you chose it with your eyes open." He walked out of the headmaster's tower past the bowed gargoyle, down the straight unbroken stair the castle had laid for him, through the brightening torches and the stilled staircases and the great doors that opened before he reached them, out into the last gold of the evening with Sirius at his shoulder and Hermione at his side and Sharpfang behind him, and 100 warm new bonds humming quietly at the back of his mind. Behind him, at the top of the tower, an old man stood at a window in the gathering dark, watching the boy go, and beside the old man the portraits of 18 dead headmasters watched too, and the oldest of them, the thin dark man in robes 4 centuries out of fashion, spoke at last, in his accent no living tongue spoke. He knelt to the elves, said the portrait, wonderingly. 1,000 years I have hung on this wall and watched 18 of you rule, and not one of you ever knelt to the elves. He turned his painted face to Dumbledore. You cannot beat him, Albus, not on this ground. The castle has chosen, and the castle is older than your law and older than their ministry and older than the thing you are about to do to try to stop him. Whatever you are planning, and I know you, I have watched you plan for 50 years, it will not give you back the castle. The castle is his. The most you can do now is decide whether you lose it as his enemy or his steward, and you have already today in this room refused to be his steward. The portrait's painted eyes were not unkind. Choose better next time, Albus. You are running out of next times. Albus Dumbledore did not answer. He stood at the window until the small figure of the boy had passed out through the gates and the wards had closed behind him, glowing now at their full ancient strength, brighter than they had been in 1,000 years, and he understood with the cold clear part of his mind that had never once been wrong about the shape of a coming storm, that he had lost the castle, that it was gone, truly gone, beyond any law he could write or any war he could invoke. Recognized away from him by a magic older than anything he commanded. And so, being who he was, he stopped trying to win the castle, and began instead to plan how to keep the boy from holding it, because if Albus Dumbledore could not be the master of Hogwarts, then he would at least make certain that the master of Hogwarts was a boy who could not stand alone against the storm, and would in the end need an old man's help, and would, in needing it, give the old man back a measure of the only thing he had ever truly wanted, which was not the castle and not the gold. And not even the power, but the right to be the one who decided, for the greater good, what happened next. He sat down at the great desk and wrote 3 letters, one to Cornelius Fudge, one to the Department of Magical Education, and one, the longest, to a woman in a small pink office whose name he disliked and whose methods he despised, and whose ambition he had just decided sincerely, for the greater good, to use. 300 miles to the south, the woman in the pink office received Albus Dumbledore's letter at 9 o'clock the next morning, and read it twice and smiled and reached for the clean sheet with educational decree number written at the top. And at last, in her sweet round poisoned hand, she filled in the number. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The establishment resists the educational decree came on the 11th day, and it did not come quietly, because the ministry had decided that the time for quiet was past. It came on the front page of the Daily Prophet, beneath a headline 3 inches high, Hogwarts placed under ministry protection, and beneath the headline a photograph of Cornelius Fudge looking grave and statesmanlike at a podium, and beneath the photograph a great deal of careful, sweet, poisonous prose that Harry recognized as the work of a single hand even before he reached the signature at the bottom. The decree was number 22. It established, in the interest of the safety of the children of Britain during a period of uncertainty, a new office, the Hogwarts High Inquisitor, appointed by and answerable to the Ministry of Magic, vested with authority to oversee the governance, security, and administration of the school. And it named, as the first holder of that office, Madame Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Hermione read it aloud at the breakfast table in the private rooms above Gringotts, where they had made their headquarters, and when she finished she set the paper down very carefully, as though it might bite. "They're not even claiming you don't own it," she said. "Read it again, they don't mention the title at all. They don't say you're not the owner. They've gone around the question entirely. They're saying it doesn't matter who owns the castle, because the ministry has the right to protect the children inside it, and protecting the children requires controlling the castle, and so they'll control the castle whoever owns it." She looked up, and there was real fear in her eyes now, the clean, intelligent fear of someone who has seen the shape of a clever attack. "Harry, this is worse than denying your claim. If they denied it, we'd fight them on the law, and we'd win, because the law is ours. But they're not fighting on the law, they're fighting on the children. They're saying ownership is a private matter and safety is a public one, and the public interest overrides the private deed, and they're going to install Umbridge inside the castle as a fact today and dare you to throw a ministry official out of a school full of children in the middle of a war. If you do, you're the boy who endangered the children. If you don't, she's inside, and once she's inside, she never leaves." She pushed the paper away. "Dumbledore did this. This is his hand on hers. He couldn't keep the castle, so he found the one argument you can't answer with a deed, and he handed it to the worst person in Britain because she's the only one ruthless enough to make it stick." Harry read the decree a third time himself, slowly, the way Sharpfang had taught him to read a thing his enemy had drafted, not for what it said, but for what it needed to be true. And he found it the joint in the structure, the place where the smallest pressure would move the most weight, and when he found it the cold, useful thing settled in his chest and he almost smiled. It needs Hogwarts to be in Britain, he said. Hermione blinked. What, the whole thing? Harry tapped the page. Read it as a lawyer, not a victim. The Ministry's authority to protect the children inside the castle. Where does that authority come from? It comes from the Ministry's jurisdiction over magical Britain. Every line of this decree assumes, without ever stating it, that Hogwarts is a place in Britain, subject to British magical law, the way Diagon Alley is, the way the Borough is. That's the foundation the whole structure stands on. The public interest overrides the private deed because the public is the British magical public and the deed is for British land. He looked up. But it isn't, is it? Sharpfang said it the first day on the cage lift. He said I was about to stand on the only ground in Britain that no ministry has ever owned, the Goblins' ground, and then he said I'd learn I stood on a second such ground every September the 1st. The cold thing in his chest sharpened to an edge. Hogwarts isn't in Britain, Hermione. Not in law. The founders didn't build a British school. They built a sovereign one on land they bought and conquered and warded against the crown specifically so that no king and no council could ever do exactly the thing the ministry is trying to do right now. It's extraterritorial. It always has been. The ministry has been administering it for centuries the way they administer everything else, and everyone's forgotten it was ever otherwise because there was never an owner to remind them, but the charter remembers, and the charter is the original, and the goblins kept it. He stood. Get Sharpfang and get the sovereignty clause. They're not attacking my deed. They're attacking my jurisdiction, so we're not going to defend the deed. We're going to prove that their decree was written by a government that has no power over the ground it's written about, and we're going to prove it in front of the one body even Fudge can't ignore. The Wisengamot convened on the 14th day in emergency session, because the question of who governed Hogwarts had become, in 3 days, the only question in Britain, and the chief warlock had summoned the full court to settle it. The chief warlock was Albus Dumbledore. He had held the office for decades, and he had not resigned it, and Harry understood, walking into the great domed chamber beneath the ministry with Sharpfang on one side and Hermione on the other, that this was the cleverest part of the trap and the part he had been waiting for. Dumbledore had refused to fight Harry for the castle directly, because he had lost the castle and knew it. So instead he had arranged for the question to come before the one court he controlled, where he could sit above it all in the robes of the impartial chief warlock, and shape the proceeding, and appear to be a neutral elder statesman gravely weighing the safety of children against the claims of a boy, while the ministry's decree did the actual work of taking the castle, and Dolar's Umbridge did the actual work of holding it, and Albus Dumbledore kept his hands, as he always kept his hands, clean. The chamber was full. 50 witches and wizards in plum-colored robes filled the tiered benches, and the public gallery above them was packed, and the press box bristled with quills, and at the center of the floor, where the accused traditionally stood, someone had placed a single chair, and Harry understood that the chair was for him, and that sitting in it would make him a defendant, and he did not sit in it. He stood beside it with his witnesses, and he let the empty chair be a statement, and he watched Albus Dumbledore, high in the chief warlock's seat, note the empty chair and understand exactly what it meant. "Mr. Potter," said Dumbledore, and his voice filled the great chamber with the practiced gravity of 50 years, warm and sorrowful and entirely fair-seeming. "This court has convened to consider a matter of the gravest importance, the governance of Hogwarts School in a time of uncertainty and danger. You have made a claim of ownership, which the goblins of Gringotts support and which the ministry, by its recent decree, has chosen neither to affirm nor to deny, but to set aside in favor of a more urgent question, which is the safety of the children currently in the school's care. The court would hear you. I must caution you as chief warlock that the question before us is not whether you own the castle. The question is whether in time of war the private ownership of a fortress full of children can be permitted to override the public interest in their protection. That is the question. Address it if you can." It was, Harry thought, beautifully done, the trap closed in a single sentence, the ground chosen, the question framed so that any answer he gave was an answer to the ministry's question and not his own. Dumbledore had told him in the Goblin's room that he would fight with the whole weight of an establishment, and here it was, the whole weight, arranged with the patience of 50 years. So Harry did not answer the question. "With respect to the chief warlock," he said, and his voice carried, because the chamber was built to carry the voice of whoever stood at its center, and he had chosen to stand at its center. "I'm not going to address that question because it's the wrong question, and I think the chief warlock knows it's the wrong question, and I think that's why he chose it." A stir went through the benches. "Question the chief warlock has asked assumes a thing that isn't true, and the whole proceeding rests on the thing that isn't true, and so before this court votes on anything, I'm going to prove the thing that isn't true is false, and then there won't be anything left to vote on." He turned not to Dumbledore but to the full court, 50 plum-robed faces, and he spoke to them, because they were the ones whose hands would rise. "The ministry's decree claims the authority to govern Hogwarts in the public interest. That authority depends entirely on Hogwarts being subject to the ministry's jurisdiction, on Hogwarts being a place in Britain like Diagon Alley like this chamber over which this government has lawful power. Every word of the decree assumes it, none of the decree states it, and the reason none of it states it, he nodded to Sharpfang, who stepped forward with a case of warm hinged gold, is that it isn't true, and the people who drafted the decree either didn't know or hoped no one would check. Sharpfang opened the case. He did not hand the charter to anyone. He laid it open on the small table that had been set for evidence, the warm gold catching the witchlight of the chamber and giving it back brighter, and a murmur ran through the court, because every wizard in the room knew what hinged gold of that age and that warmth had to be, and several of the oldest had gone pale. "The Charter of Founding," said Sharpfang, and his dry goblin voice cut through the chamber with the particular authority of a creature that the court could not patronize, because the court's own treaties with his house were the only reason the court could borrow gold at all. The original instrument, held in trust by Gringotts for 1,012 years, never copied truly, never lost, never surrendered. I will read the clause the ministry's drafters did not read, because they read a forgery, and the forgery omits it, as forgeries omit the inconvenient. He set one long finger on a line of Salazar Slytherin's cramped dark script. By the founding it is established that the domain of Hogwarts, the castle, the lake, the forest, and the lands bounded by the wards, shall be held sovereign and apart, subject to no crown, no council, no realm, no law of men save the law of this charter and the will of its owner, and that no king of England nor any power claiming after him shall hold jurisdiction over this ground in perpetuity by the oath and blood of the four. The goblin lowered his finger and lifted his black eyes to the court. The founders did not build a British school. They built a sovereign territory, warded against the crown 1,000 years ago for precisely the purpose the ministry now attempts, the seizure of the castle by a frightened government in the name of the public good. They foresaw you. They wrote you into the gold so that they could refuse you across 1,000 years. And they gave the gold to my house to keep, because they trusted no wizard's government to keep it honest, and they were correct, because the wizard's government is at this moment governing Hogwarts under a decree that has exactly as much force over that ground as it would have over the director's vault 300 feet beneath this chamber, which is to say none, and the director would be glad to demonstrate the none at length should the court require it. The chamber had gone very quiet. Harry let the quiet sit, because Sharpfang had taught him that a silence after a true thing was worth more than any words you could put into it, and then he stepped back to the center of the floor and spoke into the quiet. "So here's where we actually are," Harry said. "Educational Decree 22 claims jurisdiction the ministry doesn't have, over ground the ministry has never owned, on the strength of a charter the ministry has never read because the ministry has been reading a forgery for 400 years. The decree is void, not wrong, void. It is a law written by a government about a place that government has no power over, and it has no more force than if Fudge had signed a decree governing the weather in France." He turned at last to Dumbledore, high in the chief warlock's seat, and he held the old man's eyes across the whole height of the chamber. And the chief warlock knew. He's the most learned wizard alive. He's known the sovereignty clause existed for 50 years. He told me himself he'd read more history than was good for any man. He let this court convene to vote on a question that the charter answers on its face, because he hoped no one would bring the charter, and he was wrong, because the goblins keep what they're given, and I asked them to bring it. He did not raise his voice. "I'm not going to ask the court to find that I own the castle. The court can't. It's not the court's to find, it's the founders to grant, and they granted it to my blood. I'm going to ask the court for something it can do, which is to strike Decree 22 as void for want of jurisdiction, and to record that it did so over the silence of a chief warlock who knew it was void and let it proceed anyway." He let that land. "I'd like the vote now, please, before the chief warlock explains, sorrowfully, why the law mustn't be allowed to matter just now." Dolor's Umbridge had not waited for the vote. She was, whatever else she was, a clear-eyed predator, and she had read the situation in the chamber within 10 minutes of the goblin opening that dreadful case of gold, and she had understood, with the cold clarity of the truly ambitious, that the legal ground was lost, that the boy and his goblin had found the one clause that turned the decree to ash, and that the Wisengamot, for all Dumbledore's control of it, was not going to vote to govern a sovereign territory it had just been proven to have no power over, because the witches and wizards of the Wisengamot answered, in the end, to a public that had just watched a goblin prove the government a fraud in open court, and there was an election in 2 years. So while Harry was still speaking, Dolor's Umbridge had quietly left the chamber, and taken a portkey she had arranged in advance precisely against the possibility that the legal route would fail, and gone, with a force of 20 ministry officials and a writ she had drafted herself and signed in her own authority as High Inquisitor, to the place where she had decided the real question would be settled, which was not the chamber and not the law but the castle itself. Because Dolor's Umbridge had understood, before anyone, the thing that the law could not touch, that possession was 9 points of everything, and that a High Inquisitor sitting inside Hogwarts in the High Inquisitor's office with 20 officials and the Ministry's seal on the door was a fact that no clever boy's claws could dislodge, whatever the parchment said. She intended to be inside the castle, installed, established, and occupying fact before the Wisengamot finished voting, so that when the vote went against the Ministry, as she now knew it would not matter because she would already be in, and getting her out would require throwing a Ministry official bodily from a school full of children, and she had built her whole career on the knowledge that the establishment never had the stomach for the thing that getting her out would require. She arrived at the gates of Hogwarts at 2:30 in the afternoon, with her 20 officials behind her and her writ in her hand, and she found the gates closed, and the wards glowing at their full ancient strength, brighter than they had glowed in 1,000 years, and she smiled her sweet round smile because closed gates were merely a thing one opened, and she had brought among her 20 officials 4 of the Ministry's best ward breakers, and a sovereign territory was all very well in a courtroom. But she had never met a ward that 20 determined officials in an afternoon could not bring down. "Open it," she told the ward breakers in her soft, girlish voice. "The Ministry has urgent business with the children of Britain. Open the gates." The 4 ward breakers set to work. Harry felt it from the Wisengamot chamber, 300 miles away, the instant they began. Felt it because he was the owner and the wards were his, and the Keyring slept in the stone of his castle and woke at his attention. And the moment 4 wands began to press against the wards of Hogwarts, he felt it at the back of his mind, the way a man feels a hand try the lock of his own front door in the night. He stopped mid-sentence. Hermione, beside him, saw his face change and gripped his arm. "They're at the castle," Harry said low to her in Sharpfang. "Umbridge, she's not waiting for the vote. She's at the gates with ward breakers and she's trying to force them." The cold thing in his chest had gone very still and very bright. "She left while I was talking. She's going to be inside before the vote finishes, so the vote won't matter." "Then we've lost," Hermione whispered. "Harry, if she's inside when the children come back, if she's installed, you were right. You can't throw her out without being the one who—" "No," Harry said. "We haven't lost. She's made a mistake. She thinks the wards are a lock she can pick with 20 officials in an afternoon." He was already moving, already reaching, with the new thing at the back of his mind, 300 miles north to the gates of his castle where 4 wands were pressing against 1,000 years of his magic. "She doesn't understand what the wards are. Dumbledore understands, that's why he never tried to force them, why he tried to take the castle with law and not with force, he knew. But Umbridge doesn't know because Umbridge has never owned anything in her life and she thinks a ward is a thing you break." He closed his eyes. "The wards aren't a lock, Hermione. They're not a wall that keeps people out, they're a body. And I'm the thing they answer to, and she's just sent 4 strangers to cut into the body of a thing that knows my hand and only my hand." He opened his eyes, and for the first time in the whole affair there was something in them that was not cold and was not calculation, but was simply cleanly dangerous. "She's not breaking into my castle, she's attacking it, and she's doing it while I'm awake. Watch." He did not draw his wand. He did not need it. The wards were not cast by a wand, and they did not answer to one. He reached north 300 miles to the gates of Hogwarts, and he found the 4 ward breakers pressing their careful professional spells against the 1,000-year-old magic that was his, and he did the only thing an owner needed to do, which was to tell his castle, which had waited 1,000 years for a hand that fit, that the hands at its gate were not his. The wards woke the rest of the way. They had been glowing at full strength since the day he claimed the castle, but glowing was not the same as roused. And now, at their owner's word, 300 miles to the north, the wards of Hogwarts roused, and the 4 ward breakers, who had been carefully, professionally, confidently cutting into what they took for an old enchantment, found themselves abruptly cutting into something that had turned to look at them. There was no explosion. There was something far worse for a ward breaker. There was a sudden, total, intelligent refusal. The wards closing against their spells not as a wall resists a battering ram, but as a hand closes around a wasp. And the 4 ward breakers' careful spells rebounded up their own wands and threw all 4 of them flat on their backs on the road outside the gates, wands smoking, and the wards did not so much as flicker. And a low note rang out across the grounds that every one of Umbridge's 20 officials felt in their teeth. And that several of them later described privately as the most frightening thing that had ever happened to them, because it was the sound of a thing the size of a country noticing that they were there. Dolor's Umbridge stood at the gates of Hogwarts with her writ in her hand and her 4 best ward breakers flat on their backs in the road, and for the first time in a great many years, the sweet round smile faltered. She tried, of course. She was not a woman who gave up because a thing was difficult. She ordered them up and ordered them to try again, and they tried again, more carefully, and the wards threw them down again, harder, and one of them did not get up quickly. She produced her writ and read it aloud at the gates in her soft girlish voice, the full text of Educational Decree 22 in the authority of the High Inquisitor, as though the wards were a recalcitrant clerk who might be brought round by a sufficiently official document, and 300 miles away in the Wisengamot chamber, Harry Potter, who could feel everything that happened at his gates, laughed out loud once in the middle of the most important legal proceeding in 50 years. Because the idea of reading a ministry decree aloud to a 1,000-year-old sovereign ward was the single funniest thing he had heard in his life, and because he could feel the ward's response to it, which was nothing at all, the vast patient nothing of a mountain being shouted at. "She's reading them the decree," he said to Hermione, wonderingly, delightedly. "She's standing at my gates reading my wards the decree as if they'll be impressed. Hermione, she doesn't understand anything. She thinks the whole world is made of officials who can be made to comply." He shook his head. "She's not getting in, she is never getting in. The wards won't let her, and they won't let her because they're mine, and she came to take them by force while their owner was awake to feel it. Tell the court. Tell the court right now while it's happening that the ministry's own High Inquisitor is at this moment attempting to force the wards of a sovereign territory, has injured a man doing it, and has failed because the territory is sovereign and the wards know their owner. Get it on the record while she's still lying about it being a routine inspection." He looked at Sharpfang. "Can Gringotts witness an event 300 miles away?" "Gringotts," said Sharpfang with relish, "can witness anything to which the charter is a party, and the wards are the charter's own work, and what is done to them is done in law before this court the instant the owner attests it. Attest it, Lord Potter. I will record it under the director's seal, and it will be a thing that has happened, and it cannot be unhappened, and the woman in the pink cardigan has just handed you the single most damaging fact of this entire proceeding, which is that the ministry, having been proven in open court to have no jurisdiction, attempted to take the castle by force 10 minutes later. There is no recovering from that. She has lost the law and the force in the same afternoon, and she has lost them publicly, and she does not yet know it because she is still, at this moment, reading a decree to a wall. 2 floors above the Wisengamot chamber in the minister's private office, 3 people who did not like one another were discovering that they needed one another, which is the only foundation on which the establishment ever truly builds. Cornelius Fudge was pacing. He had been pacing since word reached him that a goblin had read a 1,000-year-old clause aloud in open court and turned his educational decree to ash, and he was pacing now in the particular way of a frightened man who has begun to understand that the thing he was told would be simple is not simple, and that his name is on it. "Sovereign," he kept saying. "They're saying it's sovereign, that it was never ours. Dolors, I signed a decree governing a place that was never ours. Do you understand what the prophet does to a minister who governs a place that was never his? Do you understand what Madame Marchbanks just did to me in front of the press box?" "I understand perfectly, minister," said Dolors Umbridge, who was not pacing. She sat in the chair by the cold hearth with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed into its sweetest roundness, and she watched Fudge wear a track in the carpet, and she let him, because a frightened minister was a malleable minister, and malleable was exactly what she required of him just now. "And I understand something the boy and his goblin and dear old Albus have all, in their cleverness, overlooked." She let the silence stretch until even Fudge stopped pacing to hear it. "They have proven that the ministry has no jurisdiction over Hogwarts. Very well, let us grant it. Let us grant every word of their sovereign clause." Her smile did not waver. "But a sovereign territory, minister, is a foreign power. And the ministry has a great deal of authority over how a foreign power conducts itself on the borders of magical Britain, how its goods cross our lines, how its people travel our roads, whether its sovereign is recognized at all by Her Majesty's magical government, whether its currency is honored, whether its qualifications are valid, whether a child educated in its walls may sit a British examination or hold a British wand license or take a British post." The sweetness in her voice had a blade in it now. "They have won the argument that we cannot rule Hogwarts. They have not yet noticed that in winning it they have made Hogwarts an island, and an island, minister, can be blockaded. We need not take the castle at all. We need only make it worthless to hold, a sovereign rock in the sea, recognized by no one, its degrees void, its graduates barred from every ministry post, its sovereign a 15-year-old whom no foreign office in the world will receive. Let the boy have his castle. Let us simply see to it that owning it costs him everything that made it worth owning." Fudge had stopped pacing entirely. "The parents," he said slowly, the ambition kindling in him through the fear, as it always did, the moment someone showed him a way to win that did not require courage. "If their children's qualifications are worthless, if no Hogwarts degree is honored by the ministry, the parents will pull their children out. They'll demand a school the ministry recognizes. They'll demand we build one. They will demand it within a month," Umbridge agreed placidly. "And we will, reluctantly, sorrowfully, for the good of the children, provide it, a proper school, a ministry school. And the boy will be left the sovereign of an empty castle on a rock, a king of nothing, and he will come to us in the end and beg to trade his worthless sovereignty for the one thing we can give him, which is recognition, and the price of recognition, minister, will be everything the founders spent 1,000 years keeping out of our hands." She rose, smoothing her cardigan, and crossed to the window that looked out over magical London. He thinks he has won because he has proven we cannot make him a tenant. He has not understood that there is something worse than being a tenant, and it is being a landlord no one will trade with. We will not fight him for the castle. We will simply close every door in Britain to it, one educational decree at a time, until the castle is a prison he holds the only key to. She picked up her quill from the minister's desk and looked at it with something close to affection. Have the boy underestimated, Minister. It is the most useful thing a clever young man can be. He is fighting the last war, the war over who owns the castle. He has not yet noticed that I have already moved on to the next one, which is over whether owning it will do him the slightest good. She dipped the quill. Now, Educational Decree 23, concerning the recognition of foreign and extraterritorial magical qualifications. Shall I draft it, Minister, or will you? The vote was not close. It could not be close after that, after the goblin had read the sovereignty clause from the original charter, and the boy had proven the decree void on its face. And then, while the court still sat, word had come, attested under the director's seal and impossible to deny, that the ministry's own high inquisitor had at that very hour attempted to force the wards of the sovereign territory she had just been proven to have no power over, and had failed, and had injured a ward breaker doing it. The Wisengamot was many things, and a good deal of it was cowardly, and a good deal of it was in Fudge's pocket, but it was not in the end willing to put its name to a decree that had been proven void, and then enforced by violence against children's wards, not with the press box bristling and an election in 2 years, and a goblin in the chamber making careful, audible notes. They struck Decree 22, void for want of jurisdiction, by a margin that made the careful ones in Fudge's pocket suddenly remember that they had always had grave reservations. And they did one thing more, which Harry had not asked for and had not expected, and which told him that the tide had turned further than even he had hoped. A member of the court, an old witch named Marchbanks, who had examined Dumbledore himself for his NEWTS 70 years before, and feared no one living, rose and asked, in a dry carrying voice, why the chief warlock, who by his own admission had read more history than was good for any man, had convened the full Wisengamot in emergency session to vote on the governance of a territory that he must have known for 50 years to be sovereign and beyond the court's power. And whether the court was to understand that the chief warlock had wasted its time or misled it, and which of the two he would prefer entered in the record. The chamber went very quiet and turned, all of it, to look at Albus Dumbledore in the chief warlock's seat. And Harry, watching the old man's face, saw him understand that the question could not be answered, that there was no version of the truth that did not damage him, that he had either misled the court or wasted it, and that a man could not be the impartial chief warlock and the architect of a void decree at the same time, and that Griselda Marchbanks, who feared no one, had just said so in open court in front of the press. It was the first wound the old man had taken in the whole affair that he had not chosen, and Harry watched him take it, and watched him, with the practiced grace of 50 years, decline to bleed in public. Madam Marchbanks raises a fair question, Dumbledore said, and his voice was as warm and grave as ever, and I will answer it honestly because this court deserves honesty. I convened this session because I believed, and still believe, that the safety of 1,000 children in a time of war is a matter grave enough to be examined even where the law's answer seems settled, and because I hoped that examination might produce a settlement more durable than a deed, an accommodation between the school's owner and the realm that protects it. I did not foresee that the ministry would attempt force. I deplore it. I had no hand in it. This last was a lie, and Harry knew it was a lie, and Dumbledore knew that Harry knew, and across the height of the chamber the two of them looked at each other while the old man told it, and something passed between them that was not hatred and was colder than hatred, the recognition of two players acknowledging without words that the game had moved past the place where either of them could pretend not to be playing. I will accept the court's judgment. The decree is void, so be it. But I will say to this court and to the boy what I have said from the first. The castle's title is not the danger. The danger is the war, and the war does not care whose name is on the deed, and we have spent an afternoon proving who owns the gate while the thing that means to come through it grows stronger. I hope we have not been proud. I fear we have been proud, and I fear we will learn the cost of it sooner than any of us would wish. It was a good exit. It was, Harry admitted to himself, a very good exit, the old man taking his defeat and turning it, in a single speech, back into a warning, repositioning himself from the architect of a failed seizure to the lone sober voice who had tried to broker peace and been ignored, laying down, for the record, the prophecy by which he would later say, "I told you so." Harry would have admired it if he had not understood exactly what it was, which was the most dangerous man in Britain conceding a battle in order to keep the moral high ground for the war. But the decree was void. Umbridge was at the gates with her wand smoking and her writ unread by anything that cared. The Wisengamot had struck the seizure and all but censured the chief warlock for letting it come. And Harry Potter walked out of the chamber the acknowledged sovereign of his own castle, with the law and the wards and the goblins all proven, in a single afternoon, to be his. he should have felt triumphant. He felt instead the cold thing in his chest pull tight, because he had won the law and won the force, and the woman in the pink cardigan had still, somehow, taught him something, and what she had taught him was this: that the establishment had now tried law and tried force and lost both, and that there was only one thing left for a cornered establishment to try, which was the thing they had been circling all along, the thing Lucius Malfoy had been waiting to offer with a smile and a knife behind it, the thing Dumbledore's exit speech had just laid the ground for. They had failed to take the castle from the boy, so now they would come for the boy himself. And Harry, walking out of the Wizengamot into the cold light of his own victory, understood that the next move would not be a decree, and would not be a ward breaker, and would not come at the gates of Hogwarts at all. It would come at him personally in the dark with a smile, and it would come soon, because the establishment had run out of legal ground and magical ground in the same afternoon, and a cornered establishment with nothing left to take a thing by was a far more dangerous creature than a confident one, and he had just in open court cornered the entire establishment of magical Britain. "Sharpfang," Harry said quietly as they came out into the atrium, "I'm going to need to talk to the goblins about my personal protection today, because we've just won everything, and the only thing a man who's lost everything has left to play is the player." He looked at the old goblin. "I've cornered them. Tell me they taught you what cornered things do." "They taught me," said Sharpfang, and for once there was no relish in his voice at all, only the flat hard truth of a creature that had survived 1100 years of cornered wizards. "They bite, Lord Potter, and the establishment you have just cornered has owned the dark of this country for 1,000 years, and there are things in that dark that do not answer to decrees or wards, and one of them has wanted you dead since before you could walk." He stopped in the middle of the gleaming atrium and looked up at the boy who had just won a castle. "You have won the war for the castle. Now you must survive winning it. They are not the same victory, and the second is harder, and it begins tonight." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The eviction, the bite came that night, exactly as Sharpfang had promised, and it came at the boy, and it came with a smile. The smile belonged to Lucius Malfoy, who arrived at the private rooms above Gringotts at 9 in the evening, unannounced, having paid a great deal of gold to learn where Harry was staying, and who came alone, and unarmed, with his silver-headed cane held loosely, and his pale face arranged into the particular expression of warm respect that the Malfoys reserved for people they intended to use. He had come, he said, as chairman of the Board of Governors, to congratulate the young lord on his remarkable victory, and to propose between gentlemen an alliance. Harry let him in because Sharpfang had taught him that you learned more from a snake in your parlor than a snake in the grass, and because the rooms were goblin rooms, and a goblin room into which an enemy had been admitted was the single most thoroughly warded place in Britain, and Lucius Malfoy did not know it. "You have done," Lucius said, settling into a chair he had not been offered, "what no one in 1,000 years has done. You have taken Hogwarts from the old man. I confess I did not believe it possible. I sent Gringotts expecting a forgery, and he came back white as a sheet, babbling about gargoyles. You are a remarkable young man, Mr. Potter, or should I say Lord Potter? The title becomes you." He smiled. "I have come to suggest that a young lord, however remarkable, however well advised by his goblins, is going to find the holding of his prize a great deal harder than the taking of it. You have made enemies, Lord Potter, the ministry, the old man, and others older, darker, more patient, whom you would be wise to count among your enemies even though you have never seen their faces. A young man alone against such a field needs allies. The Board of Governors could be such an ally. The old families could be such an ally. I could be such an ally." The silver head of the cane turned in his pale fingers. "We want very little, only a voice in the shaping of the school that is, after all, where our children are sent, a school restored to its proper traditions, a school that remembers what it is for and whom it is for, and does not waste its ancient endowment on charities. Stand with us, Lord Potter, and you will not stand alone, and the old families will see to it that no decree and no inquisitor ever troubles your gates again. Refuse us, and you will find that a boy alone, however rightful, is a very fragile thing in a very dark country." It was, Harry thought, almost the same speech Dumbledore had made, dressed in different robes, the same offer: accept our protection and surrender a little of what is yours, the same threat folded inside it: refuse and learn how fragile you are. The establishment had run out of law and run out of force, and so it had come at last to the oldest move of all, the move Sharpfang had named in the atrium. It had come for the player with a smile to buy him or break him, and it had sent the Malfoys to do it because the Malfoys had been buying and breaking the young heirs of Britain for centuries and were very good at it. "You said others," Harry said, "older, darker, more patient, whose faces I've never seen." He kept his voice mild. "You mean Voldemort, Mr. Malfoy. You mean your master. You came here tonight to tell me that if I don't take the board's protection, your master will kill me, and you arranged your face very carefully so that you could say it without saying it, so that later you could swear you only meant the ministry." He watched Lucius Malfoy's pale composure hold just barely around the use of the name. here's what you didn't account for. You came into a goblin room. Everything said in a goblin room that a goblin chooses to witness is witnessed, recorded, sealed, kept on the only books in Britain that can't be made to forget. You just threatened the life of the owner of Hogwarts in a coded way you thought was deniable, in front of witnesses you didn't know were there. A door opened, soundless, and Sharpfang stepped into the room, and behind him a second goblin with a quill that had been writing the entire time, and Lucius Malfoy's pale face went, for the first time, genuinely still. It isn't deniable anymore, it's a thing that happened. And a governor of the board threatening the life of the school's owner on behalf of a Dark Lord is grounds, Hermione checked. She checks everything twice, for the owner to remove that governor from the board, and to void every act of the board he has chaired, and to bar him and his house from the castle and its lands in perpetuity. Harry leaned forward. You came here to break me, Mr. Malfoy. You've broken yourself. Sharpfang, has it been recorded? Recorded, sealed, and witnessed, said Sharpfang, with the deep contentment of a creature watching a wizard who had cheated his house for 30 years walk into a contract he could not read. The chairman of the Board of Governors has, in the hearing of Gringotts, conditioned the safety of the owner of Hogwarts upon the owner's submission to the board, and referenced the agency of a third party in the matter of the owner's death. It is the clearest case of duress and conspiracy I have witnessed in 91 years, and I have witnessed a great many wizards condemn themselves in my parlors, and none so neatly. The old goblin's black eyes glittered. He will want to leave now. I would advise him to. The wards of this room have noticed what he is, and goblin wards, unlike the ministries, are permitted to express an opinion. Lucius Malfoy left. He left with his composure in tatters and his cane gripped white-knuckled, and the understanding, dawning cold across his aristocratic face, that he had not come to break a fragile boy at all, that he had walked smiling into a trap baited with his own contempt, and that the boy had led him into the goblin room precisely so that he would say the thing that ended him, and that the entire visit, from the moment Harry opened the door, had been the boy's, not his. At the threshold he turned once, and the mask was entirely gone, and what was under it was the bare fury of a proud man who has been outplayed by a child. You think you have won, he said softly. You have a castle and a goblin's ledger. My master has patience older than your founders, and he wants you dead more than he wants the castle, and he will not come to your goblin parlor to say so where it can be written down. He will come in the dark, Potter, where there are no witnesses, and your wards and your ledgers will not save you, because the thing that is coming for you does not care what is written on the only books in Britain. He's already tried, Harry said, in a graveyard, with his whole circle around him and me tied to a headstone, 14 years old, no goblins, no wards, no witnesses but his own Death Eaters. The dark you're threatening me with, Mr. Malfoy, is the dark I came out of 3 months ago, and I came out of it, and your master didn't kill me then with every advantage he could want, and he's not going to kill me now while I'm awake and warded and standing inside the strongest sovereign magic in Britain with 100 elves bound to my will and the founder's own castle answering my hand. He met the pale fury at the door without flinching. Go home, Mr. Malfoy. Tell your master the boy owns the castle now, and the castle bites. And tell him I'll be waiting in the one place in Britain his patience can't touch, behind walls that threw the ministry's ward breakers flat on their backs for trying what you're threatening. He's welcome to come. He'll find I've been busy. Good night. The door closed. And Harry stood in the warm goblin room with the threat recorded and sealed, and the chairman of the board destroyed in a single evening, and he understood that the establishment had now spent its 3 weapons, law, force, and the player, and lost all 3, and that there was nothing left for them to do but the one thing he had been working toward since the first drop of blood fell on the lineage parchment. It was time to evict. The eviction took 3 days, and it was, by design, both legal and magical, because Harry had learned from the whole affair that being right and being acknowledged were 2 different victories, and that a thing done only in law could be lied about, and a thing done only in magic could be called a trick, and a thing done in both, witnessed, sealed, and felt in the teeth, could be neither. The legal eviction came first. On the strength of Lucius Malfoy's recorded conspiracy, Harry, as owner, dissolved the Board of Governors, not suspended, dissolved, the whole body, on the grounds that a board chaired by a man who had conspired against the owner's life could not be trusted to govern the owner's property, and that the board's authority had in any case only ever been a delegation from a stewardship that the owner had now reclaimed. Hermione drafted the instrument, Sharpfang sealed it. It was served on each governor in turn, and not one of them contested it because every one of them had heard by then what Lucius had walked into, and a governor who contested his own dissolution was a governor inviting the question of what he had known and when. Then Harry served the second notice, the one that mattered, the one the whole 30 days had been building toward. He served formal revocation of the stewardship itself. The instrument was short, and Hermione had made it beautiful, and it said, in effect, what the founders had written into the gold 1,000 years before, that the office of headmaster of Hogwarts was a stewardship held in trust for the owner, that the owner had been found, that the owner had offered the steward a lawful continuation of the stewardship of the wards, which the steward had refused on the record before the director of Gringotts, and that the owner therefore revoked the stewardship entire, effective at the end of the 30 days, and resumed into his own hand every key, every authority, every power of the office of headmaster that the founders had ever delegated to a caretaker in the long absence of a master. It was served on Albus Dumbledore at his desk in the Round Tower office by a goblin under the director's seal at noon on the 28th day, and the old man read it and set it down and looked for a long moment out of the great window at the grounds where the wards glowed at their full ancient strength, and he did not protest because there was nothing left to protest with. He had refused the lease. He had let the void decree proceed and been all but censured for it. Board that might have rebound the castle to him was dissolved by its own chairman's folly. The ministry's force had been thrown flat on its back at the gates. He had spent in 30 days 50 years of accumulated authority, and he had spent it sincerely, for what he still believed was the greater good, and it was gone, and he was an old man in a tower that was not his, holding a notice that did not require his signature, with 2 days left. But the magical eviction was the one the country felt. Dolar's umbrage had not left. This was the thing that made the magical eviction necessary, and Harry had known it would be, because he understood by now the particular genius of the small patient predator. That she had failed to break the wards and failed to read the decree into force, and had been proven in open court to have attempted an unlawful seizure, and that none of it had moved her 1 inch, because she had simply declined to leave the gates. She had set up with her 20 officials a camp on the road outside the wards, in tents transfigured into offices, with the ministry's seal on a board hammered into the ground, and she had begun, from outside the wards she could not breach, to govern Hogwarts by decree anyway, issuing notices, summoning staff to the boundary for questioning, declaring the school under inquisitorial supervision, filing reports to the prophet about the dangerous instability of a castle in the hands of a child. She could not get in, so she had decided to make the not getting in itself a kind of siege, to sit at the owner's gate and govern his property from the doorstep through sheer official persistence, in the bet, which had never once failed her in 20 years, that the establishment had no stomach for the thing that physically removing her would require. She had not reckoned with the wards being a body, and the body having an owner, and the owner being done. Harry came to Hogwarts on the morning of the 30th day, the last day, and he did not come to the gates. He came to the Great Hall because the Great Hall was the heart of the castle, the place where the 4 house banners hung and the enchanted ceiling showed the sky, and 1,000 years of children had been fed and sorted and kept warm, and he wanted the eviction to begin from the heart of the thing and flow outward. He brought his witnesses again, Sharpfang, Hermione, Sirius, the ministry observer who had written it bowed, Greengrass the governor who had in the end chosen a different side with his eyes open and asked to be present, and Gryselda Marchbanks, who feared no one and had asked dryly to see for herself whether the castle truly knew its lord, because she had examined 18 headmasters and intended to examine the 19th before she believed it. And he brought one more witness, who came down the moving stair as Harry entered the hall, an old man in deep blue robes with 2 days left on a notice that did not require his signature, because Albus Dumbledore had decided that if the castle was going to declare its owner and evict its long tenant, he would at least stand in the Great Hall and watch it happen, and not hide in his tower like a man pretending the storm was not breaking over his head. "You came," Harry said. "Taught you the value of being present when a thing happens," Dumbledore said. "I find I cannot in conscience fail to apply my own lesson on the day it happens to me." He looked tired and old and oddly for the first time in the whole affair at peace, the peace of a man who has finished fighting a thing he always knew he would lose. "Do what you came to do, Harry. I will not stop you. I could not, and I have stopped trying, which is its own kind of relief at the end of a very long time of being certain. I only ask one thing, and you may refuse it." His blue eyes met Harry's across the hall. "When you have evicted me, and you must, the law and the founders both require it, let it be remembered that the last steward of Hogwarts, whatever his faults, and they were many, and you have named most of them justly, never once stopped believing that the castle was for the children, even at the end, even being thrown out of it. That much I will own, and I would have it owned of me." Harry looked at the old man for a long moment, and the cold thing in his chest, which had carried him through 30 days of war, eased just slightly into something that was not warmth exactly, but was no longer cold, because Helga Hufflepuff had told him, 300 feet underground, what the house was for, and the old man had just said the same thing, and a man could be wrong about everything and right about that, and being right about that was not nothing. "It'll be remembered," Harry said. "I'll see to it myself. You were a bad master, Professor, because you were never the master, and a man who governs as a master when he's only a steward does damage he can't see. But you weren't a bad man. You were a good man who was certain, and being certain for 50 years did the damage, not malice. I'll have it remembered exactly that way. Both halves, the damage and the love, you're owed both." Turned then to the heart of his castle, and he reached, with the new thing at the back of his mind that was no longer new, the keyring that woke at his attention, the wards that were a body that knew his hand, and he began the eviction. Now stand back, all of you, and watch the house put out the last of what doesn't belong to it. I revoke the tenancy in law. Now the castle revokes it in fact. There's a woman at my gate who thinks possession is 9 points of everything. Let's teach her what the 10th point is. It began as light as it always began, the deep four-colored fire of the founders working rising through the floor of the great hall, but this time it did not crown its owner and settle. This time, at the owner's will, it flowed out from the heart of the castle through every corridor and stair and stone, a tide of warm gold light running outward toward the boundaries, and where it touched the marks the ministry had left inside the ward's reach. The notices nailed up, the inquisitorial seals, the boundary stones umbrages officials had set, every claim the establishment had pressed upon the owner's ground, it lifted them, gently and completely. The way a rising tide lifts what does not belong on the shore, and carried them out and set them down beyond the wards on the public road outside. And it carried Dolar's umbrage with them. She was not in the end thrown. Harry had thought about that in the planning with Hermione and Sharpfang, whether to have the wards hurl her bodily, which would have been satisfying and would have been a mistake, because a woman hurled is a woman injured, is a martyr, is a headline. So he had chosen something worse for her and better for him. The wards did not throw her. They simply, with the vast patient courtesy of 1,000-year-old sovereign magic, declined to contain her any longer, withdrew from around her and her 20 officials and their tents and their seals the protection and the permission that the owner's ground extended to its guests, and let the founder's tide carry the whole apparatus of the siege, gently, inexorably, with no violence that any quill could record as violence, off the owner's land and onto the crown's road, and then closed the wards behind it. Glowing brighter than they had glowed in 1,000 years. One moment Dolar's umbrage sat in her transfigured office at the gate of Hogwarts, governing the school by decree from the doorstep, the small, patient predator at the center of her web. The next, without a hand laid on her, without a spell she could name, without a single thing she could point to in a report, she found her tent and her desk and her seal and her 20 officials and herself all standing on the public road a full 10 yards beyond the wards, with the gates of Hogwarts glowing gold and shut before her, and the entire material structure of her siege deposited neatly in the mud around her like the leavings of a tide, and she understood. With the cold clarity she had always possessed even when it served her badly, that she had been evicted by the castle itself, that there was no one to fight, no spell to counter, no official to overrule, nothing to file a report against except 1,000-year-old magic that had simply decided she was not its guest, and that there was no headline in it, no martyrdom, no injury, nothing but a small broad woman standing in the mud at a shut gate, having been put out of a house that was not hers. By a house that knew exactly whose it was, she stood there for a long time. Then she gathered her officials and her dignity and what was left of her writ, and she went back to the ministry to draft a decree, and the decree she drafted was void because she had no jurisdiction, because the castle was sovereign, and she knew it was void as she wrote it, and she wrote it anyway because writing decrees was the only thing she had left, and a small patient predator who has lost her prey will sit and sharpen her teeth on paper rather than admit the prey is gone. She would be back. Harry knew she would be back. Women like Dolar's umbrage were always back in some new form under some new number, for as long as there was a ministry to give them quills. But she would never be inside his castle again, and she knew it now, and that was the eviction. Inside the great hall, the founder's tide had finished its work, and the light was sinking back into the warm, steady presence at the heart of the castle, and the witnesses stood in a silence that none of them seemed willing to break first. It was Griselda Marchbanks who broke it. The old witch, who feared no one living and had examined 18 headmasters and not believed a word of any of it until this moment, looked around the great hall at the glowing banners and the settling light, and then at the boy standing at the center of it, and she said in her dry, carrying voice, the thing that the whole country would be saying within a week, "Well, I have examined this castle's masters since before your grandfather was born, boy, and I have never once seen the castle examine its master. It has examined you, it has found you. There is no more question of it, and I shall say so to anyone who asks, and a great many will ask, and I fear no one, so they shall have it straight." She turned to Albus Dumbledore, whom she had examined 70 years before, and her old face was not unkind, but it was not soft. "Albus, you held this place a long time, and you held it well in many ways, and you held it past the moment it stopped being yours to hold, which is the one fault that undoes all a man's virtues, because it is the fault of not knowing when to let go. The castle has let go of you. Let go of it. Walk out with your head up. You have earned that much, and more than that you have not earned, and at our age there is no time left to pretend otherwise." Albus Dumbledore inclined his head to the old examiner, and then to Harry, and he did the thing that, of everything he did in the whole affair, Harry had not expected and would remember longest. He reached into his deep blue robes and drew out a heavy iron ring of keys, the working keys of the castle that the headmaster carried, the keys to the gates and the doors and the cellars and the towers, 53 years of keys worn smooth, and he crossed the great hall and held them out to Harry on his open palm and surrendered them by hand in front of every witness freely, when no law required him to and no force compelled him. "They were never mine," the old man said. "I know that now in a way I did not let myself know for 50 years. A steward holds the keys, he does not own them. I held them well and I held them too long and I forgot, somewhere in the long holding, that I was only ever holding them. So," he pressed the heavy iron ring into Harry's hand and closed the boy's fingers over it with both of his own, old and spotted and gentle. "Take your keys, Lord of Hogwarts. I give them to you freely, which I should have done the moment I learned you existed, and did not because I was certain, and certainty is the slowest poison there is. It has taken me 50 years to learn that I was only a tenant. You learned you were the owner in an afternoon, and learned what to do with it in 30 days, and knelt to the elves on the first one. The founders chose better than they knew." His eyes behind the half-moon spectacles were bright with something that was not quite tears and was not quite pride and was, perhaps, the relief of a very old man finally setting down a thing he had carried too far. "I will leave by the front doors. I would be grateful if you would let them open for me one last time. I should like to remember the castle holding a door for me, even at the very end, even on my way out of it." And Harry, the owner, who could feel everything the castle did, reached out with the keyring in the body of the wards, and as Albus Dumbledore walked the length of the great hall and out into the entrance hall and toward the great front doors, the doors swung open before him, smoothly, soundlessly, the courtesy of a house to a departing guest, and the torches brightened one by one down the length of the hall to light his way. And the old man walked out of Hogwarts for the last time through a wake of light. The castle gave him not because he owned it, but because its owner had chosen at the end to give a defeated old steward the one gift that cost nothing and meant everything, which was to let the house he had loved and overstayed hold the door for him as he left. He paused on the threshold in the last of the light and looked back once at the boy standing in the heart of the castle with 53 years of keys in his hand. And then he stepped out and the doors closed gently behind him, and the wards glowed gold and whole, and Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore walked down the long drive of a castle that was no longer his, an old man with empty hands and a clear conscience for the first time in 50 years, and Harry Potter, watching him go through the eyes of his own castle, understood that he had not destroyed an enemy. He had retired a tenant. And there was a difference, and the difference was the whole point, and it was the difference Helga Hufflepuff had built into him before he was born. "It's done," Hermione said quietly beside him. "Harry, it's actually done. The law, the wards, the board, the ministry, the steward, all of it. You own it, clean. There's nothing left for anyone to contest." She looked at him, and there was awe in her face, and a little fear, and a great deal of something that was simply glad. What now? Harry looked down at the heavy iron keys in his hand, 53 years smooth, 1,000 years old underneath, and then up at the 4 house banners glowing on the walls of the great hall, and the enchanted ceiling settling back into the evening sky over Scotland, and he felt the 100 warm bonds humming quietly at the back of his mind, and the wards whole and glowing along 30 miles of his border, and the forest waiting for its treaty, and the village that owed him rent, and the charities that had stopped paying out, and the children who would come back in September to a castle that was, for the first time in 1,000 years, truly held. "Now," Harry said, "I stop taking it back and I start making it mine. Get everyone together. The founders gave me a castle, Hermione, but Helga told me what it's for, and it's not for winning, it's for the children. So now we build the thing they actually need, on my terms, with no tenant in the tower deciding for me what's best." He closed his hand around the keys. "Now I'm not the owner anymore. Now I'm the Lord of Hogwarts, and there's a great deal of work to do, and for the first time in my life, every bit of it is mine to do, and no one in the world can tell me I can't." Minerva McGonagall found him in the great hall an hour after the gates closed behind Albus Dumbledore, and Harry had been half expecting her. Because of all the staff, she was the one who would neither flee the change nor flatter it, and a thing not yet finished was the staff, and the staff began with her. She came down the hall in her tartan-edged robes, with her back straight as a wand and her face giving away nothing, and she stopped a precise and deliberate distance from him, neither close enough to seem to beg nor far enough to seem to defy, and she looked at the boy she had taught transfiguration for 4 years and watched nearly die in 4 separate Junes, and she did not call him Potter, and she did not call him Lord. And Harry understood that she was waiting to find out which of the two he was going to require her to mean. "I taught here for 39 years under Albus Dumbledore," she said. "I have watched you serve him notice, evict him by the founder's own magic, and take from his hand keys he carried before your parents were born. I have read the charter. Miss Granger was good enough to provide the staff a certified copy this morning, which was more courtesy than the ministry has shown us in 50 years, and I find that it says precisely what you say it says, and that I have spent 4 decades calling a tenant the master of a house, which is a thing a Scotswoman does not enjoy discovering about herself." Her mouth was a thin line. So I will ask you one question, Mr. Potter, and your answer will decide whether I remain in this castle or follow Albus out the door, and I will know if you lie to me because I have caught clever liars than you in this very hall." She held his eyes. "He governed for the children in his way, whatever else he got wrong. Will you, not for the gold, not for the victory, not to prove a thing to the men who made your childhood a misery, for the children? Yes or no, and may God help you if it is the wrong answer, because I will hold you to it for as long as I draw breath." It was, Harry thought, the best question anyone had asked him in the whole affair, better than Sharpfang's, better than Hermione's, because it did not care in the slightest about the law or the wards or the blood, and it went straight to the only thing the founders had told him mattered. He did not answer it cleverly. He had decided somewhere in the last 30 days that there were people you outthought and people you simply told the truth to, and that the rare and valuable trick was knowing which was which, and Minerva McGonagall was the second kind. "For the children," Harry said. "I knelt to the elves before I did anything else with the castle, Professor, and I didn't do it for witnesses, whatever it looked like. I did it because a portrait of Helga Hufflepuff told me, 300 feet underground, that the castle is a roof over frightened children before it's anything else, and I believed her because I was one of them in a cupboard for 10 years, and nobody told me there was a warm roof anywhere in the world until I got my letter." He met her eyes and did not blink. "I'm going to make the defense real, because there's a war and the children need to not die in it the way I nearly did 4 times while the adults decided the truth was too frightening for me. I'm going to ease the elf bond, which Dumbledore had 53 years and the keys to do and never did. I'm going to restart the charities the founders built to keep poor children warm. And I'm going to do all of it as the owner, which means no ministry and no board and no certain old man gets to overrule me for the children's own good ever again." His voice did not rise. "That's my answer, it's yes. And I'd be grateful, Professor, if you'd stay not as a tenant's deputy, but as my deputy, the owner's deputy, the first one this castle has had in 1,000 years who actually answers to someone who actually owns the place. Because I'm 15 and I know exactly enough to know that I need someone in this castle who loves it more than she fears me, and who'll tell me when I'm wrong and who has caught clever liars than me in this very hall. I can't run a school. I can own one and protect it and reshape it, but the running of it, the 1,000 small warmnesses of it, I need that to be someone who's been doing it for 39 years and never once did it for the gold." He inclined his head, the owner to the teacher. "Will you stay?" For a long moment Minerva McGonagall said nothing. And then something happened in her face that the students who had feared her for decades would not have believed possible, a softening at the eyes and the mouth, quickly mastered but real, and she did a thing she had not done for any headmaster, not even Albus, in 39 years. She inclined her own head fractionally, a Scotswoman's bow, which is the rarest acknowledgment in the world and worth more than a courtier's grovel. "I will stay, Lord Potter," she said, and the title in her mouth was not flattery, it was a verdict weighed and delivered. "I will be your deputy, and I will run your school, and I will tell you when you are wrong, which will be often, because you are 15 and clever, and those two things together are a menace. And the first time you forget that the children come before the victory, the very first time I will say so to your face in this hall, owner or no owner, and you will listen, or you will find that the best transfiguration mistress in Britain is a great deal harder to evict than an old man with empty hands." The ghost of something almost like warmth crossed her stern face. "He never asked me to stay, you know, in 39 years, he assumed it. You asked." She turned to go and paused and looked back. "It is a small thing asking, but I find it tells me almost everything I need to know about a master. Welcome home, Mr. Potter. The castle has been cold a long time. Let us see about warming it." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Lord of Hogwarts. September the 1st came, and for the first time in 1,000 years the Hogwarts Express ran to a castle that knew exactly whose it was. Harry stood on the steps of the Great Hall in the late afternoon, and watched the carriages come up the drive through the open gates, the gates that now opened for the children because their owner had keyed every student who belonged at the school into the wards by name, personally, one at a time over 3 weeks, with Hermione reading him the register and the castle answering each name with a small warm pulse of recognition at the back of his mind. 1,000 children. 1,000 names he had spoken into the body of his castle, so that the wards would know them and hold them and let them through, and so that the wards would also know with the same certainty every name that was not on the list, because Harry Potter had learned in a graveyard, in a goblin's hall, in a Wisengamot chamber, that a fortress that does not know who belongs in it is not a fortress at all, and he did not intend to be surprised at his own gate the way the ministry had been surprised at it. He had not slept much in those 3 weeks. There had been a great deal to do, and most of it was the kind of work that did not show the unglamorous architecture of actually holding a thing rather than merely winning it, which Sharpfang had warned him would be harder than the winning, and which had turned out to be harder than the winning, and which Harry had discovered to his own surprise that he loved. He had spent his whole life being managed. It turned out that managing a thing well, when the thing was yours and the choices were yours, and no one in a tower was overruling you for your own good, was the most satisfying work he had ever done. The first thing he had done, before the children came, before anything else, was the elves. He had gone down to the kitchens on the second day of his lordship, alone, and he had stood in the great warm vaulted room where 100 elves cooked for 1,000 children, and he had called them together, and he had told them what he had decided, and he had asked, not commanded, asked, which no master of that castle had done in 1,000 years, whether the bond he had changed in the headmaster's tower was the bond they wanted, or whether they wanted more. It had been the hardest conversation of the 3 weeks, harder than the Wisengamot, harder than Lucius Malfoy, because the elves did not want to be asked. Helga Hufflepuff had warned him of exactly this, 300 feet underground, that the bond was not a chain to most of them but a home, and that a careless freedom would be a cruelty and not a kindness, and Harry had found it to be true. They had wept when he asked. They had pressed their faces to the warm stone floor and begged him not to send them away, because to an elf the offer of freedom sounded like the threat of exile, and Harry had understood, standing in the warm kitchen with 100 frightened faces turned up to him, that he had almost made the exact mistake the founders had built him to avoid, which was to decide what was best for a great many people without asking them what they wanted. So he had not freed them. He had done something harder and better. He had knelt again on the kitchen floor this time, and he had said, "I'm not sending you away. This is your home, and the bond is your home, and I'm not going to take your home from you because of an idea I had about freedom. Here's what I'm offering instead. The bond stays. It's yours as much as mine now. I made it warm in the tower, and it's going to stay warm. But from today you have wages, whether you spend them or not. You have names, and I'll learn every one of them, and I'll use them. You have the right to say no to cruelty from anyone, and to come to me, and I'll answer. And if any of you ever, no shame in it and no exile in it, decides you want to be free, truly free, a free elf with wages and a home here still if you want it, you come to me, and I'll free you myself, and you'll still have a place at this castle for as long as you live. That's the offer, not freedom instead of home. Freedom and home both, however much of each you want. Because I know what it is to be offered one and told it's the other, and I'm never going to do that to anyone in my house." And the old elf with the great green eyes, the one who had named him master in the tower, had lifted her face from the floor and looked at him for a long moment, and then she had said in her shaking thin voice, the thing that Harry would carry for the rest of his life, 1,000 years we serves, Master Harry, and no one ever asks us what we wants. They freeze us, or they keeps us, or they hurts us, but no one asks, you asks. She had wiped her enormous eyes on her clean new tea towel with the castle's crest. We stays because we wants to now, and not only because the bond says, and that is a different thing, sir, a very different thing, and you is the first master in 1,000 years to know it is different. We stays, and we is glad. The kitchens of Hogwarts had been, since that day, the warmest place in a warm castle, and Harry ate there as often as in the Great Hall, and he learned the names, all 100 of them, and he used them. And the food, the staff agreed, had somehow gotten even better, though no one could say quite how, except that it had begun somehow to taste like it was made by people who were glad. The second thing he did was the forest. He went to the centaurs himself on the 7th day, walking into the deep wood alone but for Sharpfang, because the forest was a sovereign within his sovereignty, and you did not send an envoy to a sovereign, you went yourself, and because the centaurs had been the human world's treaty partners for 1,000 years and had been left, all that time, dealing with stewards who could promise nothing, and Harry intended the first thing they learned about the new owner to be that he came in person. They were waiting for him in a clearing, a dozen of them, led by a gray-flanked elder named Magorian, and they had known he was coming, because the centaurs read the sky better than the goblins read their ledgers, and the sky had changed the day Harry crossed the wards. Magorian looked at the boy for a long moment with the ancient, unreadable patience of his kind, and then he said, "The stars have been strange for 3 months, son of the four. We read a castle that had forgotten its name, remembering it. We read a 1,000-year wound beginning, perhaps, to close. We do not trust the human world. It has given us 1,000 years of reasons not to. But you have come into the deep wood alone, on your own feet, to speak with us as the founders once did, and not one human owner has done that in 1,000 years. So we will hear you. Speak, owner of Hogwarts. What does the human party offer the herds now that the human party exists again?" And Harry offered them the treaty, the real one, the founders' compact, dusted off and read aloud and renewed. The forest sovereign and self-governing, its trees uncut and its springs unfouled, its peoples free, and in return the herd's acknowledgement of the owner as the holder of the bond that kept the human world out, and he added to it, on his own authority as owner, a thing the founders had not written because the world had changed and a good treaty changed with it. A standing pledge that no creature of the forest would be hunted, harmed, or taken by anyone under his protection, that the centaur foals would be welcome to learn at the castle if ever the herds wished it, and that the owner of Hogwarts would stand as the forest's voice in the human courts that had spent 1,000 years pretending the forest's peoples were beasts. It cost him nothing he valued, and it gave them something no steward could have given, which was a human party who could actually hold up the human end, and Magorian, when Harry finished, was silent for a long time, and then he bowed his gray head, which centaurs did not do, and he said, "The wound closes." Mars is dimmer tonight than it has been in 1,000 years, son of the four, and Mars is the star of needless war, and it dims because a thing that should have been done 1,000 years ago has been done at last by a boy on his own feet in the deep wood. The herds accept, and the herds will remember, which is rarer than acceptance and worth more. It was the first treaty renewed between Hogwarts and the forest in 1,000 years, and Harry walked out of the deep wood with it, and the trees, the staff swore afterward, stood a little taller along the path he took. The third thing he did was the school itself, and that was the largest thing, and it was the thing Helga Hufflepuff had told him the whole castle was for. He did not tear it down and build it new. He was 15, not a fool, and Hermione had drilled into him over 3 weeks that a 1,000-year institution was a living thing, and you reformed it the way you reset a bone, firmly and once, and then you let it heal, and not the way you smashed a window. So he kept the houses because the children loved the houses, and the houses were the founder's own, and a piece of each founder still lived in the hat that sorted them. But he changed what the houses meant. He had read in the founders' vaults the things the four had actually written about their houses before 1,000 years of rivalry turned them into tribes, that Godric had wanted the brave to learn caution from the wise, and Salazar had wanted the ambitious to learn loyalty from the kind, and that the four had meant the houses to be 4 teachers and not 4 armies, and he restored that by the owner's authority, in 100 small structural ways that Hermione drafted and the hat approved. Shared classes across houses, a point system that rewarded a Slytherin helping a Gryffindor as richly as a Gryffindor winning at Quidditch, common rooms whose doors opened now to friends from other houses because the owner had asked the castle to let them, and the castle had been glad to be asked. And he changed the teaching of defense because there was a war, and the old man had been right about the war even while he was wrong about the castle, and Harry was not too proud to keep the one true thing his retired tenant had given him. He brought in real instruction, practical, hard, honest about the danger, taught by people who had fought and survived, with the curriculum written by Harry and Hermione and reviewed, of all people, by Sirius and the few Order members Harry trusted, because Harry had decided that a school full of children in a war would learn to defend themselves properly, or he would know the reason why, and he was the owner now. And there was no ministry decree and no nervous board and no certain old man to tell him that frightening the children with the truth was worse than leaving them defenseless against it. The children would be ready. He had not been ready at 11 or 12 or 14 because the adults in the tower had decided for his own good to keep him from the truth until the truth nearly killed him in a graveyard. The children in his castle would have the truth and the training and the choice. That was the difference between a steward who managed children and an owner who had been one. He restarted the founders' charities too, the quiet ones that the long stewardship had let lapse, the dowries for squib daughters, the passage for hunted muggleborns, the pensions for the families of the brave dead, and he funded them from the back rent the establishment had owed the trust for 50 years, the figure with 11 digits that Sharpfang's clerks had finally finished calculating, so that the money the establishment had spent governing a castle it did not own went now to the exact people the founders had built the castle to protect. There was a justice in that which Harry found he could not stop turning over, late at night, with a kind of quiet, fierce satisfaction, that every nut the old order had taken from his house was going back into the warmth of it. And then there was Dumbledore. The old man had left through the front doors on the 30th day, with empty hands and a clear conscience, and Harry had let him go, and Harry had thought for 2 weeks that the letting go was the end of it. But there was a war, and the war did not care whose name was on the deed, and Albus Dumbledore was, by some distance, the most capable defensive enchanter alive, and the wards of Hogwarts, however well they knew their owner's hand, did not yet know the war's hand the way the old man knew it, and Harry Potter had decided, somewhere in the 3 weeks of holding rather than winning, that a man who let his pride cost the children their best defender was no better than a man who let his certainty cost a boy his childhood. So he wrote to Dumbledore, one letter in his own hand, short, the way the goblins had taught him to write a thing he meant. You were a bad master because you were never the master, he wrote. But you were never a bad teacher, and there is a war, and the children need the best defensive enchanter alive teaching them and tuning the wards, and that is you, and pretending otherwise to spite you would be me letting my grievance cost the children their safety, which is exactly the thing I evicted you for doing. So here is an offer, and it is a real one, and it is the same one I made you in the goblin's room, except smaller and cleaner. I am offering you a chair. Professor of Defense and Warden of the Wards under my authority and at my pleasure. On a signed instrument I can revoke the day you forget which of us is the owner. You teach, you tune the wards, you keep the children safe, which you have always genuinely wanted to do. And you do it as my steward of the defense and nothing more, no headmaster's chair, no Wisengamot games run from my castle, no deciding what is best for me or anyone else under my roof. A teacher and a warden and a tenant who has finally signed his lease. The door is open. You may walk back through it the moment you can do it as a steward and not a master. And if you cannot, if your pride cannot bear to hold the gate for a boy instead of being the master of the house, then I will know that the war was never really the thing you cared about most, and so will you, and we will both have our answer. Yours, Harry Potter, Lord of Hogwarts. The reply came back in 3 days, and it was longer than Harry's because the old man had a great deal to set down, and Harry read it alone, and what it said, under all the careful, sorrowful Dumbledore of it, was yes. I have spent 2 weeks, the old man wrote, being free of a thing I carried too long, and I have discovered, to my considerable surprise, that I do not miss the mastery at all. I miss the teaching. I miss the wards, which have a voice I have known for 50 years, and which I confess I grieved to leave more than I grieved the office. You have offered me the 2 things I miss, and withheld the 1 thing I have learned I am better without, and you have done it on a signed instrument that you may revoke, which is the precise arrangement I refused in the goblin's room out of a pride I am now old enough to be ashamed of. I accept. I will teach your children to defend themselves honestly with the truth you were denied, and that I now see I was wrong to deny you. I will tune your wards, and I will teach you their voice as you once offered to let me, so that if I am gone and the war is not, the owner holds the gate himself. And I will do all of it as your steward of the defense and nothing more, and on the day I forget it, revoke me, and you will be right to. I am old, Harry, and I have been certain for 50 years, and certainty was the slowest poison there is, and I drank it daily and called it wisdom. You handed me the antidote in a goblin's room, and I spat it out. I will not spit it out twice. Thank you for opening the door a second time. Few men would have to the tenant who would not sign the first lease. I will try to be worth the second offer. Yours, in service to your house and your children, Albus. And so Albus Dumbledore came back to Hogwarts, not as its master, but as a teacher and a warden under a 15-year-old's revocable hand. And the strangest thing, the thing the staff whispered about for the whole first term, was that he seemed, somehow, lighter for it. An old man who had carried a castle for 50 years had set it down, and found that his back straightened, and found that he could love the thing again now that he did not have to own it, the way a man loves a garden better when it is enough to tend it, and he need not also pretend he made the spring. There were warm things, too, in those weeks, because Helga Hufflepuff had built warmth into the boy and the castle both, and a life that was all law and war was not a life worth holding a castle for. Sirius was cleared. It was in the end almost easy, once Harry understood that the owner of a sovereign territory held courts of his own, that the Founder's Charter gave the Lord of Hogwarts the ancient right to try and to pardon within his own domain, a right no steward could exercise and so no steward ever had, dormant 1,000 years like everything else, and that a man pardoned and his innocence proven within a sovereign jurisdiction. Witnessed by the director of Gringotts and recorded on the only books in Britain that could not be made to forget, was a man the ministry could bluster about and could not touch, because the ministry had just spent a very public month being proven to have no power over the ground Sirius now stood on. Harry held the court himself in the great hall, with the true memory of Peter Pettigrew's escape sworn and witnessed and sealed, and he pardoned his godfather under the Founder's own authority, and Sirius Black walked free in the one place in Britain the ministry could not reach to stop it, and then walked, the staff noted, a great deal taller, into the post of flying instructor that the Lord of Hogwarts had created for him on the spot. Because a free man needed a place to stand, and a godson needed his godfather close, and the castle asked had been glad to make a room for him in a tower with the doors unlocked, exactly as Sirius had promised, somewhere warm. The Weasley twins came up to the castle on the second weekend, summoned by a letter that said only the enormous thing is done and it needs doing loudly to someone who deserves it. Are you free? And they had read it and packed in 4 minutes flat. Harry put them in charge of something he had decided no school had ever properly had, and every school desperately needed, which was a department devoted entirely to the practical, joyful, slightly dangerous business of teaching children to be clever under pressure. Escape, misdirection, improvisation, the art of the unexpected, all the things that had kept Harry alive that no curriculum had ever taught him. And the twins had looked at the official-looking instrument granting them a budget and a classroom and a free hand, and George had read it twice, and Fred had said in a voice of deep emotion, "He's giving us a school to be us in," and they had not stopped grinning for a week, and detentions in their department became, somehow, the most sought-after punishment in the castle. In Neville, Harry made a point of Neville, because Neville's parents were in a ward in St. Mungo's for a war the boy had not started, and because Harry had learned that the quiet, brave ones were the ones the old order overlooked, and the new order would not. He found in the Founder's charities he had restarted, the pension that should have gone for 15 years to the families of the brave dead and the brave broken, and he saw to it that it went, at last, to the Longbottoms quietly with no fuss, and he told Neville himself in the greenhouse where the boy was happiest, that his parents' courage was written now into the books of a sovereign house that did not forget, and that whatever the war had taken, it had not taken the record of what they were. Because Harry had restored the record himself, Neville had not been able to speak. He had only gripped Harry's hand hard with earth still on his fingers, and nodded, and that had been enough, and from that day the quiet, brave boy stood a little straighter too, the way everything in the castle seemed to stand straighter now that it was held by a hand that fit. There was Ron too, and Harry had not forgotten him, though the summer's work had been the kind that could not be shared with anyone who had not first sworn it to silence and then proven they could keep the swearing. He found Ron on the third evening of term on the bench by the lake where the two of them had sat as first years, and he sat down beside him without ceremony, and for a while neither of them said anything, because there was a thing that needed saying and both of them knew it, and it was Harry's to say. "I cut you out of the summer," Harry said at last, "on purpose. Hermione knew before you did, and you noticed, and it hurt, and you've been too proud to say so and too decent to sulk, which is worse." He looked out at the dark water where 100 feet down, a court of merfolk now held a renewed treaty with the boy beside Ron on the bench. "I want to tell you why, because it wasn't what you think. It wasn't that I trust her more. It's that I needed a lawyer first, and then I needed a fighter, and the fighter's turn was coming and I was saving you for it, and I did it badly, and I'm sorry." Ron was quiet for a moment, ears red, looking at his own hands. "I thought you'd outgrown us," he said gruffly. "You went and inherited a castle and the goblins and the founders, and I was still worried about my OWLS and whether Mum noticed I'd nicked Fred's old robes. Hard not to think it when your best mate turns out to own the school you're scared of failing out of." He scuffed the dirt. "I'm not clever like Hermione. I can't read a 1,000-year-old deed. I don't see the angles. What have you got that needs a bloke who can't see the angles?" "The thing the angles can't give me," Harry said. "Ron, Hermione found the law, and the goblins found the gold, and Sirius brought the name, and the founders gave me the high ground, and every single one of them is a weapon, and none of them is a friend who'll tell me I'm being an idiot to my face without first checking whether I'm technically right. You do that, you've done it since we were 11. You're the one who notices when I've gone cold and stopped being a person, and you say so, not cleverly, just true, and I need that more now than I've ever needed it, because I'm holding more power than a 15-year-old has any business holding, and the surest way for me to become the thing the founders built the lock against is to surround myself with weapons and forget to keep one friend who calls me an idiot." He held out his hand. "I'm putting you on the board of the school, Ron. Not because you can read deeds, because you're the one person in my council whose only job is to tell me when I've forgotten I'm a person. Slytherin warned me about going cold all the way through. You're my answer to it, will you?" Ron looked at the offered hand and then at his friend, and the red went out of his ears and he gripped it. "You're an idiot," he said with enormous satisfaction. "See, free of charge, first of many." And he was grinning, and Harry was grinning, and the cold thing in Harry's chest eased a notch it had not eased in 30 days, because there are some thaws that only an old friend can manage. The last threat dissolved more quietly than it had been raised, which is the fate of most clever threats that meet a clever answer. Hermione brought him the intelligence on the 4th day, a draft leaked by a sympathetic clerk of Educational Decree 23, concerning the recognition of extraterritorial magical qualifications, and the shape of the whole gambit laid out beneath it. Not to take the castle, but to blockade it, to make a Hogwarts degree worthless in Britain, to bar its graduates from ministry posts, to strangle the sovereign island by closing every door around it until owning it was a punishment. "It's umbrage," Hermione said, white with the cold admiration one clever strategist gives another. "It's genuinely good, Harry. She's not fighting the war we won. She started a new one. She's going to make the castle worthless instead of taking it, and if a Hogwarts degree means nothing, the parents will pull their children and demand a ministry school, and the whole thing depends," Harry said, "on the ministry being the only body in Britain whose recognition matters." He was already smiling because Sharpfang had taught him to read a clever enemy's plan for the assumption it could not survive without, and he had found it. "Get me Ragnarok, because Umbridge has made exactly the same mistake the ministry made the first time, and she's made it because she's a small predator who's never owned anything and can't imagine a world she isn't the center of." He looked at Hermione. "She thinks the ministry's recognition is the only recognition in Britain, but it isn't, is it? There's another sovereign house in this country, older than the ministry, with its own currency that every shop in Diagon Alley honors, its own treaties with every magical government in Europe, and a 1,000-year grudge against exactly the establishment that's trying to blockade me." His smile widened. "Gringotts. Goblins recognize a Hogwarts degree. If the goblins honor my qualifications, employ my graduates, and tell every foreign ministry they treat with that Hogwarts is a recognized sovereign whose people carry goblin letters of standing, then the ministry's blockade isn't a wall around an island. It's a wall around the ministry, shutting the British government out of the one school the entire goblin financial network stands behind. Let Fudge make a Hogwarts degree worthless for a ministry post. I'll make it worth more than a ministry post, backed by the only bank in Britain, recognized by every government Gringotts trades with, and the parents won't pull their children, they'll fight to get them in, because a Hogwarts graduate will be the one young person in Britain the goblins vouch for." He stood, She wanted to make owning the castle worthless. She's about to find out she's handed me a reason to build something the Ministry can't touch and can't match. Draft the counter-compact, Hermione. And put it on the record before Decree 23 is even signed, so that the day Umbridge plays her clever card, the whole country already knows it's been trumped. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and then she began, slowly, to laugh, the helpless laugh of someone who has watched a trap close on the trapper. You let her build the machine, she said, and then you showed her it was never plugged in. You told me to, Harry said, the night I served the notice in the rooms above the bank. I told you to write it down so I could say it to a courtroom someday. I was listening to my own counsel for once. On the last night before the children's first full week began, Harry went down, alone, to the deepest vault of Gringotts, because Sharpfang had sent word that the charter wished to speak to its owner one last time before the term turned, and a wise heir listened to his house. The cavern was warm, the deep dry warmth of a banked thousand-year fire, and the charter lay open on its black iron stand, the hinged leaves of gold catching the torchlight and giving it back brighter than it came, and Harry climbed the dais and laid both his hands flat upon it, palms down, the way Ragnar had taught him, and the gold warmed to meet his skin, and on the deepest of the four doors the sigil of the crowned lion ran like water and became, once more, the portrait of the four. Godric with his sword, Salazar with his serpent, Rowena with her bronze circlet, Helga with the earth on her hands and the yellow flower behind her ear, and they woke, and they looked at the boy with his hands on their charter, and for a long moment none of them spoke. Then Godric Gryffindor laughed, the great booming painted laugh, but softer now, gentler. We have been watching, he said. We see a great deal from in here when the owner's hand wakes us. We saw you kneel to the elves twice. We saw you walk into the deep wood on your own feet. We saw you offer the old man a second door after he spat on the first. He shook his red head wonderingly. 1,000 years we waited, Sal, and we got one who is brave and cold and kind and clever all at once, and uses each at the right moment, which not one of the four of us ever managed for a single afternoon. We were terrors, the four of us. We quarreled and we sulked, and we built a lock to keep our own children from each other's throats. And the lock waited 1,000 years and opened for a boy who is better than all of us and is 15 and knelt to the elves. He grinned through the gold. I have never been so glad to be made obsolete. He restarted the charities, said Helga Hufflepuff softly, and her painted eyes were bright. He gave the backrent to the squib daughters and the hunted children and the brave broken. He found the Longbottom's pension and he sent it. I built those charities, child, 1,000 years ago, and I wept when I felt them stop under the long stewardship, and I have wept again in here, feeling them start. You did the thing I built the warm part of the castle for, and you did it without being asked, because you knew in your blood what the house is for. She smiled, the warm last of the light smile. I told you the first time, not a castle. A roof over frightened children who have nowhere else that is warm. You have made it warm, child. You have made it warmer than it has been in 1,000 years. We felt the kitchens. We felt the elves be glad. Well done, oh well done. Rowena Ravenclaw inclined her bronze-circled head, and her gray eyes, which had warmed by a single degree the first time, warmed by another. You did the arithmetic, she said, all of it. You never once stopped doing the arithmetic, even when you knelt, even when you were kind, especially when you were kind. You were kind on purpose in front of witnesses, because you understood that a kindness witnessed is a kindness that becomes law, and a law of kindness is the strongest law there is, and the hardest to repeal. You outthought an entire establishment at 15, and you did it without once becoming the thing the lock was built against, and that, child, is the rarest arithmetic of all. The arithmetic almost no one who can do it ever bothers to do, because it is so much easier to be clever and cruel than clever and kind. You were clever and kind. Keep doing the arithmetic. Never stop. It is the only thing that keeps an owner from becoming a tyrant, and you will be the owner for a very long time. And Salazar Slytherin spoke last, the cold, precise voice that was a cousin of Harry's own, and he looked at the boy for a long moment with his green-lit eyes, and what he said was not a blessing quite, because Slytherin did not give blessings, but it was the thing Harry had most needed to hear and had not known he needed until he heard it. You held the high ground, said Slytherin, every time. He offered you the warm blanket of his certainty a dozen ways, and every way you stayed on the law and made him stand on the war, because the law was the ground where you were taller, and you never once let him move you off it. That is what I built the serpent's part of you to do, and you did it without becoming cold all the way through, which is the part I could never do in life and which killed the four of us as a fellowship in the end. I went cold all the way through and lost the others and lost the castle and lost 1,000 years of being able to walk these halls except as a portrait in a vault. His green eyes did not blink. You did not go cold all the way through. You stayed cold where the law lived and warm where the children lived, and you knew every moment which was which. That is the thing I could not teach because I never learned it. You came knowing it. And so the castle is yours, heir, truly yours. In a way it was never even ours, because we built it and quarreled over it and lost it to our own coldness, and you took it back and made it warm and held the high ground the whole way. The serpent at his collar turned its painted head toward Harry and bowed. Hold it well, hold it long, hold it kind. And when your time comes, 1,000 years or one from now, see that you leave it to a hand that fits the way we left it to you. That is all, that is everything. Now let us sleep. We are content. For the first time in 1,000 years, we four are content, and we quarrel about nothing, because there is nothing left to quarrel about. The lock opened, and it opened for the right one, and our long watch is over at last. The light sank. The portrait settled back toward its 1,000-year sleep. The four founders' content, the crowned lion returning to the deepest door, and the gold quieted under Harry's hands. And the cavern was only a cavern again, warm and dim and vast, and Harry Potter stood on the dais with his hands flat on the charter of his house and felt at the back of his mind the whole living weight of Hogwarts. The wards along 30 miles of his border, the lake and the forest and the village, the 100 warm bonds. The 1,000 children sleeping safe under the enchanted ceiling, the old man tuning the gate, the godfather in his unlocked tower, the twins plotting joyful mischief, the warm kitchens and the standing straighter castle, all of it his, all of it held, all of it, for the first time in 1,000 years, home. He lifted his hands from the gold. Ragnarok was at the foot of the dais, the ancient director, and Sharpfang beside him in his chain of office, and the old goblin looked up at the boy who had walked into his bank to complain about a misplaced purse and walked out the owner of its oldest castle, and Ragnarok of Gringotts, director of the oldest sovereign house in Britain, bowed fully from the waist, the bow of a house to a sovereign, the second such bow in the affair and the deepest. "It is done, Lord Potter," the old goblin said. "The law, the wards, the blood, the forest, the children, the gate, all of it held, all of it yours, all of it clean. 1,000 years my house kept your charter and waited for the hand that fit, and the hand has come and held and made the cold thing warm, which we did not expect, for we are goblins and we did not think a wizard could. You have surprised us, we do not surprise easily, and we will not forget it." He straightened. "Go home, Lord of Hogwarts. Your castle is waiting, and your children are asleep in it, and the gate knows your hand, and there is nothing left in all of Britain that can take it from you. Go home." And Harry Potter went home, up out of the deep warm dark, up through the white bank over the goblin warren, out into the ordinary noise of an ordinary night, and north 300 miles to a castle on a loch beneath the mountains, where the wards glowed gold and whole and brighter than they had glowed in 1,000 years. And the gates opened before he reached them, and the torches brightened down the length of the entrance hall to light his way. And the staircases settled into a single straight flight to carry their owner home, and 100 warm bonds hummed quietly their welcome at the back of his mind, and 1,000 children slept safe beneath a ceiling full of stars. He had been a guest in every room of his life. He stood now in the heart of the one room that was his, that had always, since before he was born, been his, and the castle lay around him awake and content and held, the founders' content in their vault, the war still coming but the gate well kept, and Harry Potter, 15 years old, owner of Hogwarts, lord of the castle his blood had woken after 1,000 years, looked up at the enchanted ceiling full of stars in the home he had taken back and made warm, and he was, for the first time in his life, exactly where he belonged, and there was no one in the world who could tell him otherwise. The lock had opened. It had opened for the right one, and the long watch was over at last. Chapter 7 End.